Morning.
Check 1 2. Check.
here. As always, we start with a prayer, a reading, or thought. Can you hear me? I don't know if you can quite hear or not. Not very well. How's that? Is that better? Okay. Well, welcome again. Second welcome. We start with a prayer, reading, or thought, and the Pledge of Allegiance. And we would like to ask for volunteers out of the audience if you'd be willing to give a prayer, reading, or thought, and the Pledge of Allegiance. Which one? Prayer. When you come up, would you make sure and state your name? That way we can have it as well. And you do the pledge. Thank you. Come on up. Yes, right here.
LeVar Oldham. Our Father in heaven, we are grateful to Thee this day for the opportunity to be here together, the citizens of this beautiful county. Grateful for the privileges that are ours in this country. Grateful for the opportunities that we have to reason with one another, and ask that Thou might direct those things that are said and done in this meeting, that actions might be taken in an appropriate manner. We ask Thy blessings upon those who serve in this county, that Thou would watch over them. Ask Thy blessings upon our leaders throughout the state and our country, and upon those who serve and to defend the freedoms with which we have been blessed. We are grateful, Father, for these many blessings, and ask Thy Spirit and direction as we deliberate together this day. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen.
Lana Hiskey, please follow me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Thank you for participating with us in that. It has been requested before we build our agenda that we move an item. It's the work session item, which deals with watershed protection. I wanted to ask my fellow commissioners if that would be okay to move that up to the front. There's a lot
Absolutely.
of people here. Are you fine with that?
Sure. Just that work session item, or do you want to do the work session together?
We could do both. Yeah, there was just a request for the, what would you prefer since that one's yours?
Maybe we do them both while people are here at the front.
Okay,
I'm good with that.
okay. All right. So with that, we'll pull those two up. Now we'll build our agenda. We'll move everything on our agenda to consent. That means that it would be approved, ratified, or recommended. And then we'll take everything that we want off. So everything right now is on a consent agenda to be approved or ratified. And then we'll build our agenda, both the consent agenda and the regular agenda. And just for note, since there's a lot of people here, if you do have comments for a specific item, you can come up when that item is being addressed and speak to the commission on that. And then general public comment will be at the end. Of course, the work session is a little bit different, but that's just for our agenda. All right, so on our consent agenda, listed consent agenda, there's 19 items. I've got one question on number 1, and I wanted to make note that on number 2, the reason why we can hold our health care is because of the rate that we have, and thank you to the employees who do a tremendous job of keeping us above the 70% level, so that increase is only 2%. I just wanted to mention that as we're working down through it, not to pull it off the agenda. Then number 4 for the summary, Justin, are we good? Okay, so we're okay with that? Okay. And then it's been requested that we strike number 11. Any others on the published consent agenda that we need to pull off?
Do you have any?
No?
Do you have any?
Moving to our regular agenda, if we could hold number 2 for discussion. It's been asked that we strike number 5. If that's okay. We hold number 9. If we could table number 10 till after our closed meetings, there was a couple of conflicts I think we need to talk about. And number 11, hold number 11, 12, 13, flip the order of 14 and 15. We could do that by request from community development, just so we hear those different times. But we still need to take action on both those two, so we need to hold both 14 and 15, but just flip the order. That's all I have. Any others?
I don't have any other.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt your building of the agenda. On number 1 on regular, one of the applicants there has asked to continue their application for 2 weeks, and it's the Franklin Charter School.
Okay. I have that note. That's number 2, right?
No, that's on, oh, sorry, yeah. I had 1 and 2 mixed up there. Yeah, so,
Okay.
yeah, that is number 2. Great.
Okay.
We'll address
So-
that in due time.
Okay, yes. Thank you. All right. Is the order okay in the work session? Work sessions, okay. So the first one on our work session then is to discuss a proposed ordinance amending Utah County Code 10-8 regarding Utah County's drinking water source protection provisions.
Thank you, Commissioners. Ben Van Noy, County Attorney's Office. I have been the attorney that has been drafting the proposed amendment together with input from the Commissioners, Environmental Health, and the public. And for all the, thank you for all those that have come to address this topic, for their information. This is a work session, so no final decision will be made today. We're here to gather your input and to address any concerns that might be brought up. I have gone over this amendment with all 3 commissioners, but just for the benefit of those here, if we could just do a quick rundown, kind of the context of where we're coming from, where we started and why we're here. In 2010, the state required counties to pass a source protection zone ordinance to protect water sources. In 2010, we passed 10-8 in the county code. And since then, we have realized that there has been undue restrictions and limitations on in certain areas and on certain people who wish to develop. So that's why we're trying to address those concerns at this time, all while protecting environmental health to the best that we can and in accordance with state statute. As we amend ordinances, we always like to clean up definitions and whatnot. So we've done that in a few of these definitions. We've removed some definitions that weren't necessary in that they were not used anywhere else in the ordinance. We've added a couple of definitions as well. We have removed requirements on the county to collect and maintain source protection maps. And the reason we've done that is because the state keeps the the most current and technically accurate map online that the county has access to that delineates every source protection zone. So whenever that is needed to be used by the county has access to that. So we've removed the requirement for the county to have those maps in their own possession. We've also added the requirement, cities have the option of passing ordinances that make their source protection zones more stringent, more restrictive. If they do so, we've required them to give the county notice, so we are aware of city source protection zones that overlap the counties that are more strict. The meat and potatoes of what we are trying to change is we're trying to give people more options to build, all the while protecting drinking source protections. On the last page, we've identified areas that if they are platted prior to 2010, so prior to the state requiring the passing of this ordinance, an applicant can get an exception from the state or from the drinking water system, the down source drinking water system. If they do so, if they get an exception to build, to expand, or to relocate a wastewater system, they can do so. In Zone 2, we proposed to require an alternative wastewater system. Zone 2 is typically right next to a drinking source or a spring, and in order to protect the downstream drinking water, an alternative system is the best we feel we can do to protect the environment. Those are the bulk of the changes. If there's any questions, or if we can just turn it to the public, however the commission would like to proceed.
Some of my my interest in this was that there was some needs coming from residents in which they had older systems that were in place, and then because those older systems were in place, if they wanted to upgrade, because they were in areas in which basically it was forcing them to keep an older system in place, even if it was not worth it. If we were to upgrade, would be a lot better. But because of the ordinances that we had in place, it made the lot almost to the point to where you had to just demolish the house and just leave this vacant ground, which I found unbelievable. So I was in favor of going through this and looking at it and finding alternate ways in which we can, if we're next to a stream or whatever in that protected area, at least be able to upgrade, because it didn't make sense that you have a deficient system in place and you want to leave it in there because you can't change everything. So at least there was some options for that. So I see that's in here. That's the reason why I was willing to look at this and see what we can do.
And I do have a couple questions
Please.
and a comment to start with. First of all, thank you. Your tireless efforts on this. Thank you to the public for your patience on this one. I think we started like a year and a half ago or so, 2 years ago, battling with, prior to me, you were working on it. I know when I came into office, we started with this. We had countless meetings with the state, with drinking water, debating back and forth whether this was a state-controlled rule, whether we could do an ordinance. We finally got the state to concede to us that we could in fact do an ordinance, and then Ben, you've been very diligent in responding to, I know, my requests, and I'm sure the requests of the public in trying to draft this. So it's definitely been a lengthy process, and I appreciate your diligence in trying to work through it. A couple questions that I would have. The first one is concerning the map with the state.
Yes.
I recognize the state has fantastic resources, is developing this, and it certainly makes sense to use their map and system. What mechanisms do we have in place if we feel like there is an error in the map? So if the county or perhaps a qualified independent firm was to do a study and to say, this particular area is a zone 2 or a zone 1, but if we really look at the science, at what's underneath the ground, at the drainage patterns, it really shouldn't be classified as this zone. What mechanisms do we have to try and alter that state map to potentially remove an area from a zone 2 or to reclassify it into a more appropriate zone?
Right, that's a great question.
Because that's, using the state gives me a little heartache, because I don't want to lose control if we want that adaptability, if we have good science saying this should be changed. Is there a mechanism in place to do that?
There is, and the old ordinance actually included that mechanism. In Part H1, if an applicant disagrees with a boundary or a line, there is a process in place where they can apply to take a look at that and get those lines redrawn. That's a mechanism that was in place before, and we're definitely leaving that in because we feel that that's an appropriate remedy in some cases.
Perfect. The other question I would have is how do we determine what enhanced systems are appropriate for what zones? What scientific data, what mechanisms are we using to determine what's an appropriate system for an appropriate zone?
Yeah, that's a great question. Conventional systems have been shown through scientific studies to not treat the effluent, which is the water, the wastewater that's coming out of these conventional systems. It doesn't treat them enough to produce potable water. And an alternative system or packed bed media system does that. It's not perfect, but it's the best systems that we can put in place. And Jason Garrett with our environmental health department is an expert in that, and he can talk more to that.
So when we're talking about treatment between the two systems, sorry, Jason Garrett, County Health, there is no definition in other rules that defines whether it needs to be an alternative or we're specifically referring to a packed bed media versus just a conventional system. Through these countless meetings that you've talked about, Commissioner, was the basis of it is basically a controlled system versus an uncontrolled. So any of your conventional deep trench, your typical systems are an uncontrolled pollution source, and it's not so much for maybe bacteria and bugs that we're thinking about. The real difference is on things like nitrates and other inorganics that we have concerns with of going into these water sources. So really discussion, and that's what we would pose as we look at this, is if it's important to have a controlled system, something that's measured, monitored, and looked after on a continual basis, or if it's just the set it and forget it type system.
Okay. So in summary, if we're looking at a controlled system in a Zone 2 area, the reason we're saying we want a controlled system is because we feel that there is significant threat to the downstream user for nitrate and other pollutants to enter the system that are harmful and damaging to the general public at large as drinking water systems.
Correct. That would be the concern.
And that's
upgrade from an older system.
right, or
Correct.
leakage from an older system, and
We
that's
want to give
Even if
options.
it's in the zone.
to those.
Yes.
And I appreciated you bringing that up, Commissioner. That's our big concern too, is because we don't want to cause a greater threat just because people are scared to move forward and do something. We want to have options that they can move forward and make a better situation.
Thank you.
Any other questions, commissioners?
This time.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll open it up for comment. Go ahead and come on up. Please just state your name.
My name is Dave Jackson. I'm with Cover Bridge Canyon. How much time would we have for comment?
Usually about 3 minutes or so.
Okay. If I'm representing the larger group, could I have a little more time? Is that
Sure.
acceptable? Okay. First of all, I appreciate your time. I do, while this has been frustrating for all sides, I know that you guys have worked. I do believe that you guys are sincere in your desire to protect the community. I do believe that there is some bad information. I've got 10 pages of stuff. I probably won't get to all 10 pages. But I think you guys covered the history pretty well. From a packed bed media system, we have done research on these things. These are good systems in certain conditions. Mainly the conditions are places where you have a high water table, where you have surface water, where you have residents putting shallow wells in next to them. They make sense there. They actually do a thing that septic systems don't do. They don't apply to the situation in which we have. In Cover Bridge Canyon, we are a community of approximately 500 acres. We're only 70 homes in 500 acres. We're inside of a drainage area of 4,000 acres. It means we have more than 50 acres per resident. We do not have high septic density. In the studies that have been referenced across the nation, they say in shallow water tables with water a couple of feet down. We have water more than 400 feet down before we hit the water table. 400 feet down. We have no wells from other residents. No one does it. We come from a single common public source. In those systems where there is high water table, where there's surface water, where there's tight density, where there's all these issues going on, the recommendations are that you look at one septic for every 1 acre. Somewhere between one septic for every 0.34 acres to one septic every 1 acre. We're nowhere close. We average 50 acres per residence. It doesn't make sense. We looked at the financial impact of these systems. If you look at the life of a house as being 50 years, this is the impact that will have either on the immediate homeowner or the impact on the homeowner when he attempts to sell it, because it will be considered by the new buyer. We looked at these systems, we called the various providers. We only found 2 providers in the state for these packed bed media systems. In the whole state, we could only find 2 providers. The cost over 50 years is approximately $70,000. If you look at the annual maintenance, if you look at the initial installation, if you look at the design, if you look at the other factors that are coming in, the life of the system being 20 years, these things all come together and you're looking at an equivalent of $70,000 impact per residence. That puts, if you add that all together, that comes up to a $5 million cost for Cover Bridge Canyon to put this in place. In 1974, the EPA established clean water standards. And every 6 years, they've revisited those standards. They have two numbers that they come up with. One is a limit, one is a goal. The goal is saying, based on all the health science that we have, all the scientific consensus, what is the optimal level that we can get to? The limit is saying, taking into account economic feasibility and technological feasibility, what should we actually do? How should we compromise? How should we get something that is reasonable that still improves the quality of health? In the case of nitrates, which I think we all agree is the best metric for this evaluating septic contamination, they said a number of 10. And they said a number of 10 for both the goal and the limit. This is real important. What this means is the EPA and scientific consensus has not been able to find any reason to lower that number below 10 parts per million. There is no health benefit to getting to 5 parts per million or 1 part per million or 0.1 parts per million. This is a really big deal. Historically, Cover Bridge Canyon was initially platted in the early 70s. We've been around for a long, long time. We've been building houses since then. We're currently at 70 homes. Our full size is 78 homes. We're not looking to put in a major subdivision any bigger. We have 8 more homes that we want to build, and the homes that we have, we want to maintain. But in that time, because we're a public water source, we've been required to monitor our water. Over the 50 years, our average that we come in is between not detectable and 0.1 parts per million. That means in our worst years, we are 1% of the goal, not the limit, the goal that the EPA has set. The goal that they said there is no value in going below this. We're at 1% of that. Now, I think it's important to also look at the USDA did a study recently, 2011, I think it was, across Utah, Wyoming, and Idaho. They looked at the nitrates in the soil, just background. They looked at residential areas, they looked at agricultural areas, they looked at livestock grazing areas. They sampled the water in all those places. The Utah average is 1.67 parts per million of nitrates. With no pollution, no septic, it's 1.67. Right now, with 70 septics pouring in for 50 years, we are 1/16 of the average for Utah. And I have a hard time looking at that number. I have a copy. We got it from September 2018, our most recent lab analysis that we've done. 0.1 parts per million. But there's a little footnote. It says, as a lab, we can't go below 0.1 parts per million. So we don't know if we have undetectable or we actually have 1% of what the average is. It could be lower than that, but it's ridiculously low. It's hard for me to hear that the county is really concerned about our health when we are 1/16 of the unpolluted average. It makes no sense to me. There was a study that was done, the city of Spanish Fork, they've been wonderful. When we started bringing this up, they commissioned an expensive study. They looked at this thing and they said, let's get a well-respected engineering firm to come in and take a look. They did a look, they did an analysis. Their conclusion was that if we were going from non-detectable to 1 part per million, 1/10 of the goal, it would require 376 additional homes, 376 more homes than what we have in the canyon right now. It didn't say we're at risk. It didn't say we're almost at risk. It didn't say we're not detectable, and we can build 376 more homes to get 1%. we still won't even be up to the unpolluted average if we do that. So here's this study, here's this 50 years of history. In my industry, we do, we do what's called a sniff test. And I apologize if this is a little graphic, but in a sniff test, we take something that's conceptually difficult and we try to simplify it with analogs that are very easy to understand. In the case of Coveridge Canyon, we can select cows as the analog. A few basic well-established facts are important to this analysis. An average cow produces approximately 40,000 pounds of poop per year. This is USDA. An average adult human male produces 360 pounds of poop per year. Coveridge Canyon consists of approximately 70 homes with an average of 4 residents per home. Assuming every member of every family produces as much poop as an adult male, Coveridge Canyon produces 100,000 pounds of poop per year. All of Coveridge Canyon produces as much poop as 3 cows. Actually less than that. Because we are potty trained and use toilets, 60 to 90% of this human poop is broken down before it leaves the drain fields of existing conventional septic systems. Existing conventionals. Thus, all of Coveridge Canyon delivers nitrate contamination equivalent to somewhere between 1/4 of a cow and 1 cow. Taken further, this lonely virtual CBC cow is pooping across an area of 4,000 acres. That's 6 square miles. This highly distributed poop must now migrate a minimum of 400 feet vertically and on average 3 miles horizontally to reach potentially impacted water sources. During this travel, this one virtual cow's worth of poop is being continuously filtered by soil, broken down by bacteria, and diluted by the water flowing in an area across 4,000 acres of drainage. In summary, 1 cow, 6 square miles, 3 miles of soil filtering, 4,000 acres of dilution. I'm an engineer. I can't see the risk there. Just with logically, just looking at that, throw away the science, throw away the history. That 1 cow wandering lonely in the foothills, it doesn't frighten me. It doesn't tell me I've got to come up and say, community, you need to spend $5 million to protect our water sources from that 1 cow. In a sniff test, we must ask ourselves, should we be concerned? The contaminant level is currently 0.1. How can we be concerned that this one lonely cow is doing something if we have 50 years of history that says we're at 0.1 and we've been continuously at 0.1? Mathematical analysis. So let's ignore the history. Let's ignore the science. Let's ignore the logic. Let's look at basic mathematics. Pole Creek drainage, in which Coveridge Canyon resides, averages 22 inches of precipitation per year. This results in 2.64 billion gallons of water. Every year, 2.64 billion gallons of water flowing through. The calculation for parts per million is really simple. You take the volume or mass of nitrates, you divide it by the volume or mass of the water. If you do that, it is mathematically impossible for us to get to 1 part per million. It is impossible for us to get to 10 parts per million. We could poop all day long and we cannot get to it. We could take we could eliminate our septics, run direct pipes straight into the aquifer right next to the water source. We can't get there. It doesn't matter what we do. And so for the community, for the Utah County Health Department to say we are concerned, I can't understand that. How can you ignore the math? How can you ignore the logic? How can you ignore the science, the studies that have been done? How can you ignore the history and say that you're concerned? And we absolutely must as a county put in something that's going to cost our community $5 million. I can't understand that. In my industry, we have to analyze complicated things. And sometimes we analyze it one way and then we analyze it another. There's times where I've seen the analysis wrong. Never in my professional career have I seen 4 forms of independent analysis all point to the same thing and be wrong. If there is concern by the Utah Health Department, I don't understand. I can't see how that's possible. The math, single division, X by Y comes up with a number that makes it impossible for us to have an issue. Recent efforts, Coveridge Canyon, we tried to comply with 10-8. We went and talked with Spanish Fork City. Spanish Fork City, they own the water source. They are responsible to their citizens to take care of their community and protect their water source. They're responsible. They looked at the history, they looked at the analysis, they said, we don't have a concern. They went to the Utah Division of Clean Water, and they said, hey, we would like to allow Coveridge Canyon to continue to use septics. The Utah State Department looked at that and said, we don't have a concern. They wrote back a response, we fully support it. In fact, they wrote something interesting. They wrote, based on the law that we, Utah created, Utah State created, this community should not even be covered by the Zone 2 restrictions. It is grandfathered in. It was established by the plating authority, which was Utah County, prior to 2010. So all of this shouldn't matter. The fact that you guys are at 0.1 shouldn't matter. The fact that you are have a study that shows there's no impact, the fact that you have this logic, the fact that you have this mathematics, it doesn't matter because you're not even supposed to be included in this. But Utah County has interpreted the prior use thing to mean actual physical use. There has to be a house on the land before 2010, or where it doesn't matter when it's platted. Utah State has come back and said that is the wrong interpretation. That doesn't matter. It is legal definition, legal land use. That is what the law was intended. That we've talked to them repeatedly. That's what they stated in the formal responses that they gave to Spanish Fork City. They said that is our intention. We'll grant you an exemption because we see no risk, but we also have to tell you this law doesn't apply. And so that's where we are. It's a lot shorter than the 10 pages, but there is not a risk. I can't speak for all of Utah County, but I can speak for my community. There is not a risk. And I would ask the Utah Environmental Health Department to look at these answers and respond to them and say why
Can I ask
they
you
should
Yeah,
be ignored.
I have several questions.
Go ahead.
So, and I appreciate your comments. So, and the information, it's clear you've done a lot of research, you've looked into this matter extensively. And I think you brought up right here at the end a very critical point. When I'm looking at this ordinance, as far as from a lawmaking standpoint, I'm assessing this countywide. And so while covered bridge is a portion that I consider because it is a Zone 2, I have to consider the implications of what I allow in Zone 2s countywide. You mentioned earlier in your comments that there is significant data that suggests in areas with high water tables, such as areas out in Lakeshore and Benjamin and other areas of the county where we're close to the lake beds, that are classified as Zone 2, that these contained controlled systems would absolutely be necessary because they're leaking. So it almost sounds to me like what you're really advocating for here today isn't necessarily that there's something wrong with our ordinance, but there's something wrong with the mapping system.
Possibly. I would say I've got two arguments. First, Utah County needs to align their interpretation of the original Utah State thing to understand what the grandfather clause is. If it was platted prior to 2010, I think it's very important for you to have the same interpretation that the originators of the law put in there, which is if it's platted before 2010, that should occur. I believe that that's important.
And I think that's important, and I messaged my assistant, he's setting up a meeting with the state legislature who initiated that, so we can look into that a little
So
further.
the second thing on the water table, we may be in a Zone 2. Legally, we may be in a Zone 2 by definition because of the rate at which water moves. And so this is me actually undermining my own statements, but we may legally be in a Zone 2 because water moves quickly. We just have an incredibly massive volume of water that dilutes it. And so I don't know if you can get us out of Zone 2. There is no risk to the water source. That's well established. But we may in fact be in a Zone 2. What I would really like is for the ability for you guys to look at the actual risks associated with a Zone 2 and put an exception clause in there and say, you know what, if we look at it and we conclude that there really is no risk, even though it's Zone 2, go ahead and keep using septics, and we'll monitor. We'll give you a little incremental thing, and if after a couple of years we're still at 1/16 of the
And I guess
background
that's,
average, go for it.
that's an interesting take, because when I'm looking at it from my perspective, I'm just saying, well, then you shouldn't be in a Zone 2 if the metrics in there make it so that there's no risk, then why are
But-
you
but
in
the
that zone?
definition of Zone 2 is not risk-based, it's water travel. And unless the state changes that, I'm happy if you can get us out of Zone 2, but the metrics of a Zone 2 definition are water travel toward the water source, not risk.
So that went along with my question, and it deals with, as you're looking down through this, on your own particular interest, you can see where it has some flaws because of how you're measuring and how you're assessing it. But again, we do look at it countywide, and there are others out there who are concerned about, being able to do something different and they can't. And so how is an exception to that, or some other measurements that would be in place that would be beneficial so that you could still be doing what you're doing and get the same results? Is it the exception? Is that,
I-
is that the solution to it in your
So
mind?
the easiest solution for
Yeah.
us, and this is selfishly for us, because I believe there's a lot of other people in Utah County that would be interested in relaxing the rules somehow.
Sure.
But for us, the easiest thing is, we existed since 1970. We existed since before a lot of people in this room were born.
Yeah.
We are supposed to be grandfathered. That is very clearly the intention of the state. We would like Utah County to simply say, we align with the original intention. That is the easiest thing for us selfishly. If you're trying to make a better solution across the county with newer things, then absolutely, I think you need to do some sort of analysis to say, is there actually a threat? Regardless of, these other factors and the zoning, can we see that we're X parts per million and we're trending towards something? Is there an association between the septics and this? In our case, our 0.1, it's probably biological. It's probably not human. It's probably 4,000 acres of natural processes breaking down, and there's nothing we can do. We put in this $5 million system, your number will go from non-detectable to still not detectable. It's ridiculous. In other cases, it may not be the same, but I absolutely think you need to put something in there that states we will analyze the situation in places where there is potential of genuine risk.
I think we need to, to work on it some more. I'm sure we can, and we can see what works on a common sense basis as well. Getting out of a certain zone, I think it's gonna be pretty hard to get out of it. I mean,
Right.
just because the definitions that are
The
there.
definitions are
Let's-
pretty
the
As,
definitions
and I
change.
think it should be, right? Because we're talking about the well-being and the health and life of the citizens.
I
So
totally support
when we
that.
make those shifts, I think they should be hard to get out of.
Zone two means you simply take a bit harder look. But if that look comes absolutely obviously, there is no risk, then you should not be afraid to say, we're gonna put septics in there. We've analyzed it backwards and forwards, and we're good with that.
And I think there's an argument that's to be made that then you shouldn't
You've
be a
been
zone
testing it
two.
for years.
For 50 years. That's a long time. And for it to continuously be between non-detectable and 0.1 with 70 septics pouring into it continuously, that tells me that adding 8 more is not an issue. Continuing the use of those 70 septics is not an issue. It is really, really hard to say, I have a concern, we must stop this, we must change something. So I guess the last point I'd like to make is we have been battling this for 3 years. I have friends in the canyon. This has been a massive financial strain. It's been a massive emotional strain on them. I hope my friend Bob Anderson can talk. I don't know if Sister Remington's here. We have one neighbor that's been with us in this fight the whole way for 3 years. They fought and fought. Their retirement was based on these lots. They purchased lots that they could build on, that they could sell for retirement. Because of this ordinance, they lost their retirement.
Because of the current ordinance?
Because of the current ordinance, they lost the ability to build on this. The property value in the canyon of our lots has gone from, yours went from almost $200,000 to $2,600. That's Bob's retirement. It went to $2,600 because of this change. The value of my property, I bought for a lot of money. It is at 5 to 10% of what I paid for it because of these ordinances. There's an impact, and we've been waiting for 3 years patiently, but this is drug on. This is to the point of being ridiculous. I am proud of the state. I'm proud of the city. I have to admit, I am terribly frustrated with what's going on at the county. I think we've got good people, but something's messed up, and I don't understand what it is. I don't understand the logic, the delays, but we don't have another 3 years. I've been telling my friends and my neighbors, I can point to certain specific neighbors that said, we have to sue, this is impacting us now. And I've said, no, please wait, please wait, please wait. I seriously am questioning whether or not I made the right decision. I think you guys are seriously trying to do what's right. I appreciate that. We can't wait another year or 6 months. We've lost faith that the Utah County is going to make the changes. I think it is right for us to move forward with other outside the system options and start acting on those now. I hope that we can reach a conclusion very, very quickly. It is so easy. Prior grandfather clause, it's done. That's what the state says. Ask them. Make a phone call. Say, what do you intend, what does it interpret this to mean? Oh, we'll bring us into alignment with you guys. And we're done. But just in closing, thank you for your time, and
Yeah,
please
I'm
make a
sure we can
change.
find a
Please make a
balance.
change really, really quickly. Thank you.
thanks.
My name's Jill Taylor. I am a retired attorney. I have served on the Planning Commission of Utah County for 10 years, back when Jeff Mendenhall was a director and back when Gary Herbert was a county commissioner. I think I have at least some understanding of Utah zoning law. And I can tell you, your problem is not your current ordinance. Your problem is the interpretation of that ordinance. We have had building permits issued since the implementation of this ordinance, I think as late as 2016. But all of a sudden, there's been a stop because someone has decided to reinterpret the ordinance in a different way. Let me read you what your ordinance says and show you how you can issue building permits under your current ordinance for pre-existing lots. Okay, your ordinance says that you have an allowed use, and the allowed use by definition is an activity or practice allowed by this chapter which does not create a risk of pollution or contamination in the specific protection zones of such significance as to require implementation of regulatory requirements, best management practices, or engineered controls. I think what he has just said is that, you know, there is not anything indicating that that the contamination is of significance. Now, you go to section E, allowed uses, and this is the one that's really important. You only have 2 allowed uses in all of the protection zones. It doesn't matter if it's 1 or 4. You only have 2 allowed uses. Those that were legally established before the effective date of this chapter, and uses incidental and accessories to use may be continued in the same manner thereafter. So that's your first use, those that are legally established before the effective date of this chapter. And the only way you lose that use is provided that such use is not determined by any court of competent jurisdiction to be a nuisance under the provisions of the federal, state, or local laws or regulations. So that is for pre-existing. Then you have all new land uses, changes of land use, or expansions of land use. They shall comply with the requirements of this chapter. Okay, I think it's interesting to note that in sentence 1, it does not say shall comply with the requirements of this chapter. You've basically said that if it is a legally established effective use prior to the date of the chapter, and it has not been determined to be a nuisance, it's an allowed use. Now, when you go down in your ordinance to G, the drinking water source protection requirements, it says, the following effective date of this article, no building permit or other form of approval from the county to develop or use real property within the county shall be issued until the applicant establishes that the applicant's proposed development or use of real property complies with the requirements of this article. What are the requirements of this article? If you are already a legally established use and you're not a nuisance, prior to the date of this ordinance, you are an allowed use. And so all that is required is each such applicant shall provide to the Utah County Community Health Department a letter from the Utah County Health Department Division certifying that the proposed use complies with the requirements of this article. All that's necessary for these lots in Covered Bridge to be allowed to build is for the county health department to say they were established before the date of this article, they are not a nuisance, and it would be handy, they can put in there that Spanish Fork City has indicated that they have no objections to this, that there's no evidence of additional pollution. But as I read your article or your ordinance, that's all that's necessary. He just needs to give a letter stating that this is a pre-existing lot and that it's not been determined to be a nuisance. The person takes that to the building department and they can go ahead and build. And whatever septic tank should be determined by what is required based on the soil, all of this. I talked with the state yesterday, and I was told that these media packed base contamination systems, that they do not control nitrates. So I don't know what the deal on that is. But here's the other point I want to make. People had this interpretation, and the health department was giving out letters. People were being allowed to build, and the only thing that changed was not the ordinance. It was somebody's interpretation of the ordinance. Now, they evidently are, I'm assuming, are thinking that a new land use, building a home on an existing lot, is somehow a new land use, but it is not. If the county has approved a single-family residential lot for building, when I build my single-family home on that lot, I have not changed the use. That is not a new use. That is not an expanded use. I am merely doing what the county had already approved. I am complying with the use of the lot. So, as far as I'm concerned, we simply have a misunderstanding of the current interpretation of the law. Now, let me just read to you.
Could I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
You obviously read this very well. In your professional opinion, you mentioned you're a lawyer. What would you define as a nuisance in this particular instance? I mean, because when we think of a nuisance, it's something that's annoying or an inconvenience, right? So what would we define as a nuisance in this particular instance?
Well, I suppose that if you had, let's say Spanish Fork, sees contamination in their source, major contamination of some sort. Let's assume that you had some homeowner up in Covered Bridge who, for some reason, is dumping a bunch of toxic chemicals down their toilets. I have no idea why they would be doing that, but let's just assume somebody's got a meth lab or something. I mean, you know, they're doing something and toxic chemicals are coming in such quantities that they are now detectable and are impacting somebody. That, I suppose, could be a nuisance, and then if you could trace the source, if you could find the individual, then you could take them to court and you could have it declared a public nuisance. That would be my understanding.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at or read the reply from the state on this issue. Okay.
Which one? we got a couple from them over the course of the last little
Okay,
while.
this was December 27th, 2018. This is in response to exception request for septic system in Source Protection Zone 2. Okay,
This is the most recent one.
the most recent one. And highlighted, I'm going to read right here. Based on the information you have provided, the division concurs with your assessment that the 8 additional septic systems may be installed within Drinking Water Source Protection Zone 2 of the Spanish Fork Cities Cold Spring and Malcolm Springs. And then they tell you their reasoning. Okay. This concurrence only applies to the 8 undeveloped lots in the Covered Bridge subdivision and is based in large part on the fact that these lots were platted and approved by the Land Use Authority prior to the time that the Source Protection Ordinance was adopted, and that the current proposed use, single-family residential, is consistent with the prior land use approval. So they are basically saying the installation of conventional septic systems in new developments, those approved after the effective date, within the source protection zone of 1 or 2 will need to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis, but they're saying those before don't apply. And in fact, they even go, they said, new lot construction in this existing platted development and covered bridge is a unique situation which does not fall under any specific division source protection regulation. They're basically saying, you're pre-existing. You don't comply on this. And they go on to say, therefore, this concurrence as to the existing sources in the previous approved lots is based not upon R 309-613, but rather is based upon R 309-611, management program to control each pre-existing contamination source. They are viewing the undeveloped lots as a pre-existing contamination source. So I think,
Which is very, interestingly enough, is very different than the first responses we received from the state when I first became involved in this issue 2 years ago.
yeah,
And there have been significant changes in the state director and the head of the drinking water department up there that we were working through. So in a timeline perspective, I would like to point that out. And I appreciate you reading that point, and I appreciate Ben and our health department's continued efforts to work on this issue that's bringing us closer to this point, because our initial response back from the state, and I was sitting in the meeting, was that, no, it's our rule, you're in a zone 2, there, you can't do anything there. That was the original feedback that we got back when I started on this 2 years ago from the state. So I think that what you just read is a great reflection of the work that Ben and our fellows from the Department of Environmental Protection here at the county have been doing on your behalf. Because that is a significant shift from the state when we originally started, and they basically just said, no, our rules say nothing can go in a zone 1 or 2.
and yet the ordinance says they're not limiting the zones. They say that allowed uses in zones 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Right.
Each use legally established before the effective date of the article may be continued in the same manner thereafter. So the ordinance, to me, seems fairly clear that these are allowed uses, that the undeveloped lots are allowed uses, and that the only thing necessary is to have the county health department certify that they were pre-existing and that they're not a nuisance, and they can certainly add that there's no objection from Spanish Fork City, things like that. But that would solve the problem.
And that's what I'm saying is originally we were getting feedback from the state who defines the map, who defines these rules, that a development in these areas were a nuisance, right? And so we've seen a paramount shift in that particular manner.
Yeah. Well, let me just from a practical, common sense standpoint, just discuss something. If the state of Utah, and realizing that we are a conservative state, we support property rights of individuals, we try to avoid having government regulatory excess, okay, you're making a drinking water protection law. If the purpose of your law was to strip property owners of their rights, their property rights, that would not go over politically. But if you're saying to everybody, okay, if you have an existing property right, you have a building lot, you're grandfathered in. This law does not apply to you. New development, that's a whole nother thing. New development, we have to be convinced that this is not going to contaminate the source. And I'll bring one other thing out, just, looking as to how, I don't know why the state was taking that particular position, because I also happened to look at what was their study guide that they gave in 2013 to Groundwater Source Protection Users Guide, which I think was mainly just to give to the counties to help them with how they were supposed to do things. And in that guide, they basically had they talk about how to deal. How do you deal with things? And when it comes to residential, okay, this is under the management program for existing potential contamination sources. They have one paragraph for residential properties. And they basically say residential potential contaminating sources, PCSs, may be more effectively addressed by using a different approach. You may be able to address them collectively through public education programs. That's what they're talking about. Then when you get to the chapter on management programs for future contamination sources, now they're talking about if a subdivision, recreational facility, mining, logging company wants to locate, we recommend you address these issues by examining land ownership and future potential uses, and adopting zoning ordinances is the most effective way to control future potential contamination sources. And that zoning ordinances will allow you to control the subdivision and make all the requirements and do all the things that then will protect it. What you have right now is you have one individual in the health department who is making the determination as to whether or not a person can build on a pre-existing lot. And that, I don't believe, was really ever the intent of the law.
As that we're in a work session, could I ask staff a few questions from some of
Sure,
the stuff that
yeah.
you've mentioned, and
Yeah.
we definitely want to give some others opportunity to speak too. When it comes to the the grandfathering section, how does staff read that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd be happy to field that, Ben Van Noy. We respectfully disagree with the madam that just spoke. Whenever there's a issue of legal interpretation, the health department comes to us. It's not the health department, it's the county attorney's office that interprets that. And I'm happy to accept that, because we are confident in our interpretation of our own ordinance. Historically, and for the past few years, that grandfather exception talks about a use. We're talking about the eight new lots. 8 new lots that eight lots that are undeveloped, that would put a new home in a new wastewater system on those lots. That, in our legal interpretation, is a new use. That's what it's been for years before me. There's been 3 or 4 attorneys that have been on this.
Yeah.
And that's all been our concurrence. We're comfortable with that legal interpretation. And so when someone proposes a new home or a new wastewater system, it is not a new use.
So the second question then is, hold on, we have to keep a certain amount of order. So then, has this been consistently applied over the years, the same interpretation, or has it been interpreted differently just recently?
My understanding, this is how it's been interpreted. Again, I have been with the health department for about 9 months, and my understanding from the previous attorneys is that this has been the interpretation.
So
And I apologize if I misspoke.
Jason Garrett, County Health. All I can speak for is the time that I've been associated in my position with wastewater, and he's correct. We would love to see something go forward, but this has been the consistent legal interpretation that we've been given as far as the marching orders since I've been in my position since 2014. So that's been a consistent legal interpretation that we've been asked to follow. So that was late 2014. That's when we first started this issue. It came up, and that was the interpretation we've been given. Prior to that, I can't speak to that, Commissioner.
Any other questions?
Can I ask about didn't we say that another one of the exceptions early on in this conversation was that if the downwater municipality provides an exception, that would apply?
And in our proposed exceptions, that is one of the options. Option 1 is you get approval from the state, kind of similar to what Covered Ridge Canyon did. The other option is to get approval from the downwater drinking public water system, the owner of that source, to say, yes, you can put it in.
Oh, that's part of the proposed
Yeah.
That's
amendment,
part
that's
of
not the
what was
existing
proposed.
code.
That's
Okay.
correct, yes. And to be clear, we would be happy to look at an exception. We want to make sure that studies that are conducted are fact-checked. We have concerns about studies that have been done, and that is one of the reasons why we would like, if there's an exception, Commissioner.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think one of the exceptions, I don't know if you were aware or not, was in the law zone we just spoke of, that we're drafting into the new ordinance, that if the downstream user, in this case Spanish Fork City, crafts that in and says that they are okay with this, that does build in an exemption. My concern is we always want to make sure that whatever science they're basing that off of comes from a recognized or qualified firm or individuals.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
I'm not certain that the current proposed amendments allow that. The exception says you can build with an expensive alternate septic system. Doesn't say you can build with conventional septic system, unless I missed.
We actually need you to come to the microphone if you're gonna speak.
All right, you wanna make that point?
Dave's point is, I'm LeVar Oldham. Dave's point is, he doesn't think that the current ordinance allows the exceptions that were just stated. My point is not to make this discussion much longer, which isn't something I'm known for, but it was clearly stated by your attorney that if the downwater, the individual, or in this case the city, Spanish Fork City, that is at risk if there's pollution in this upstream water source, if they're okay, and if the State Division of Water Quality, which is tasked with the quality of water statewide, is okay with this, my question to you and to the attorney is, why on earth is the city digging in, or the county digging in their heels and saying we have both exceptions, not one, we have both exceptions in writing from the two entities involved, and we're still saying, let's talk about this, and challenging the veracity of the potential study, which he just stated, that they questioned the source of the study, which was contracted by Spanish Fork City, that you would think would do everything in their power to protect their water source. And he's challenging that water source and the state, or that scientific information based on what he just said. You have both exceptions. Why on earth is this going on and on and on when their own stated exceptions for their interpretation, which he also stated it's their interpretation of the ordinance, which differs from Jill Taylor's, obviously. Ordinance is the same, so we are down to interpretation here. But even within his interpretation, if we had those two elements in place, this shouldn't be an issue. I'd love to hear you address that.
If we pass the revised ordinance. That's our, I would make the point that that's part of our goal in being here, is to try and pass this revised ordinance so that what you just stated is actually actionable by these guys. That's what Ben has crafted into this ordinance, that would become new, is to get you exactly what you just asked for so that we could move forward with that.
Okay, we can hear this. I want to make one note. This is a work session. We're not going to turn it into a debate. If I have to, I'll call it out of order if we start
Okay.
doing too much finger pointing or anything like that.
No, but I will point out that the interpretation has not always been what he has said it has, because the county was issuing building permits after 2010 in Covered Bridge up until 2016. They were doing it based on this. So the change occurred when they made a change in the interpretation of the law. That's the change.
That's a good point. That was what I was trying to get to when I was asking that question, is that if we've been going through a certain process and allowing for building and building permits and everything to happen, what changed? Was it the interpretation?
It was the interpretation.
Or
That's
was it, if the policy is the same, if the ordinance is the same?
Ordinance
then
didn't
what
change.
What changed?
The interpretation. That's all. The other thing I was going to say is I do not see the proposed changes as an improvement because I believe they are more restrictive. I don't think you need those. You can issue, based on this law, you can issue the letters for pre-existing homes. And just one other thing, from a zoning standpoint, how is, if the county has approved a single-family resident lot, and I build a single-family home on that lot, how is that a change? How is that a new use? I am using it in the manner that was approved by the county. It's not a new use. And if I change my house, if I add on to it, and I extend it and make it bigger, I have not changed the use of that property. It is still a single-family home on a single-family lot. The land use has not changed. If this ordinance had said any new structures, that would be a different issue. If they'd said new septic tanks, that would be a different issue. But they said new land use, all new land use. And from a zoning standpoint, you're talking about plat maps, you're talking about approved developments. That's my point. So I am not happy with what the changes are proposed. I see those as more restrictive than the current ordinance.
Neil Chamberlain. Appreciate your time. I won't belabor some of the points that have been made, but I would like to add on to that last point, which is I can personally come up with 2 instances where permits were granted and new homes or new units were installed in 2014 and 2016. So I do agree that this is an interpretation issue that we're having. Let me just, I think we've talked a lot about what the issue is, and I won't start, I appreciate Dave's description of the poop scenario. I won't get into that. I will get into what my scenario has been. I'm not an attorney. I am not an engineer. But like the attorney and the engineer, I am a lot owner in Covered Bridge. As of 2016, I purchased a lot. And I want to walk you through what happened in that scenario, because I think not only did this happen to me, I think it can or will happen to others. Which is in 2016, my wife and I purchased a 3-acre lot in Covered Bridge Canyon. We sat for months while the county did not respond to our building permit requests. When they finally did, it was, hey, come into our office. We have some bad news for you. Oh, that bad news is in 2016, 6, almost 7 years prior, there was a rezoning. And you can no longer build on that lot that you just purchased for $180,000. I had a bank tell me, similar to what was already stated, that that lot that I had purchased for $180,000 was virtually down to zero. And unfortunately, I don't know over the last 2.5 years where to look other than the county, because the state's telling me this should be a non-issue. The city's telling me this should be a non-issue, but the county's telling me that they're doing this for my benefit as a constituent, and I have a hard time, based on everything we've heard, believing that. For the last 2.5 years, I've been living in my parents' basement waiting for this to be resolved. It's time to resolve this. I'm not here to throw up this emotional tirade because of one person's experience. I'm telling you what's happened to me because I do believe it's going to, if it hasn't already happened to others. During those 2.5 years that I've been living in my parents' basement, waiting for this to get done, I've had thousands of dollars, and we can pull up the ledger, of legal fees because a year-long lawsuit ensued because I purchased a lot that I could not build on. So along with my builder, I had no choice other than to allow my contractor, who was also on the line for some of this money, to sue the original lot owner. The original lot owner who sold us the property marked a box that said approved for septics on their seller disclosures. Whether they knew or not, which is this kind of game happening between the state and the county on who should have advised, and I won't get into that. Regardless, I spent tens of thousands of dollars on attorney's fees. My builder spent tens of thousands of dollars on attorney's fees. This is not going to be exclusive to me. What we're talking about is taking the value of someone's property down to zero. Now, we want to talk about how this new amendment is going to help that situation. Yes and no. You took my $180,000 lot down to essentially zero. And I'm not saying you, just generalities. And now we're saying, well, we're going to put this amendment in, and we're doing you a favor. We're going to take it from zero to maybe 80,000. And the reason I say that is because we've been working with a realtor who lives in the neighborhood. His name is Newell. And he has estimated that because of these upgraded septic systems, alternative wastewater systems, that are going to cost us tens of thousands of dollars more, his professional opinion as a realtor and as a former home builder, nobody's going to want to pay for that. When you resell your home, that's tens of thousands of dollars that they're going to say, why would I in 20 years want to replace this system that's going to cost me $20,000 to $50,000 to $60,000? So the way I view it, and this is again my experience, which I think is applicable to others, you took my real estate property down to zero. Now we're saying, oh, but we're going to do you a favor and we're going to take it up to a partial amount. And the only way you can build a house on is if you spend tens of thousands of dollars more. While I appreciate the work that has been done, and it has been years in the making, and I appreciate those who are attentive to this, specific to Covered Bridge Canyon, as has been stated, this is an unnecessary and undue restriction. From the words of Ben Van Noy, the undue restrictions in Covered Bridge Canyon specifically are not only undue, but they are unreasonable based on all the science and the facts that we've talked about. If we're talking about people's lives and thousands of dollars, there's no reason. I have not been told yet, based on the science, why that's reasonable to ask for an alternative septic system. And to say we're doing you a favor is not acceptable, because that's my money that is A, already been taken away, and B, being asked to spend even more after 3 years. Not acceptable. I want to make one more point, and then I will end, because I know we've been going for quite some time. We could talk about the money spent. We could talk about the lost property value. What I want to talk about is the lost emotional value that this community has been going through for the last 3 years. And I hope Bob still has the time to get up here. But this is not just about money. There's a lot more at stake here than money and people's zoning issues. And I hope that we can take that into consideration, commissioners, as we look at this as a whole. And I appreciate your time, and I appreciate that we are going to look at this as a whole. Because yes, it's about legalities. Yes, it's about zoning and mapping. But it is also about the well-being of the constituents in this community, which I think is being greatly, greatly undermined. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I get a sense for how many people would like to make comments, so I can just kind of get an idea? I see the two that's up here. How many would like to, there's another over here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, if we could
Good morning,
just, I
Commissioners.
mean, I don't want to cut anything short because others have had opportunities to speak, but if we could maybe not rehash some of the same stuff that's already been spoken to be.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Tracy Tanner. I'm the president of Hidden Creek Water Company, which resides, its system and service area resides in the left-hand fork of Hobble Creek Canyon in the unincorporated area of Utah County. Hidden Creek was approved as a public water system in 1998. And as part of that approval process, it had to have a source protection plan prepared by a licensed engineer and submitted to the DEQ, Division of Environmental Quality, Department of Drinking Water, Division of Drinking Water, DDW, and which departments thoroughly review those source protection plans, of course, and then, of course, you would have to have that approved in order to go forward with your ultimate approval as a public water system. So we entered into that process many decades ago, and there's also a required update time frame that you do along the way, and we've done several updates to that source protection plan. It's a fairly extensive process, and it's reviewed by the engineers up at the state level. So I just give you a little bit of that background. Hidden Creek has a subdivision called Upper Whittemore development above its source. It's 126 lots, they're recreational. They were approved in the late 1970s. Over the course of several decades, of course, we've operated this system where the regulatory requirements for a small system such as ours are the same as they are for a small town. I have the burden of meeting all the water quality testing requirements, all the annual reporting that a small city would, but with none of the budget to do that. So you're looking at the one-person show that does that. But that's just the way it is. So in context of this current proposed amendment, and I apologize because I just got an email about this meeting, so I didn't have a lot of time to dive in and kind of digest what the changes proposed were. But some of the things I picked up immediately that concern me, as a public water supplier, I mean, there's probably no one more concerned about potential contamination than I am. You know, because I have the responsibility to my customers to protect the quality of the water. And so I have pretty good confidence in the state. I've worked with those folks for several decades. My experience with them has been very positive. They're very helpful, really go out of their way to help small systems such as ours to operate in an efficient and functional way. So that being said, one of my concerns about the proposed amendment is that it seems to be drifting towards the county having sort of this extra oversight in addition to what the state's doing. In some cases, I think it could create additional confusion and possibly conflict where maybe that's not necessary. So, for instance, I noticed that this proposal has stricken out the definition of a protected aquifer entirely. That section's been stricken out. That's a very important definition at the state level in terms of when you're going through a source protection, your engineers are doing this work. They have to meet that level of data and proof in terms of that definition of a protected aquifer. So that was a bit of a red flag to me. I'm concerned why the county would want to strip that out. But it plays into the overall, goal, I guess, of it almost feels to me like the county is going towards trying to be more restrictive. I could be wrong. I don't know what the intent and goals are because I haven't had the background behind this. But I do feel strongly that in the past, I've been a developer in the past as well. My experience has been when you try this one-size-fits-all approach to these things, it typically doesn't seem to work out so well. In the sense that you end up ignoring the engineering, you end up handcuffing the professionals that we should be relying upon, in this case, heavily relying upon the engineering and the science. I appreciated what Dave said from Covered Bridge because it sounds like he's done quite a bit of research on, the facts on the ground, which I think are really important. So it's frustrating when we get too tightly boxed into this one-size-fits-all approach to ordinance writing. So I just want to express my concern. It seems to me that some more work could be done on this. And from a public water supplier viewpoint, I'd like to see that there's more consistency with the county and the state people working together rather than this tug-of-war that seems to have been going on the last couple of years. So I think that with a little more consideration and work, this could be hammered out in a way that really serves the citizens, protects the water, and everyone can win on this. Thanks.
Appreciate it. In regards to more restrictive, I want to make one point very, very clear. When I started this 2 years ago, I had documentation from the state and legal opinions saying we had to abide by state rules which did not allow for any systems in a zone 2. That was where we started at 2 years ago. And so when I'm looking at an ordinance that's saying, hey, we're at least going to let you have an enhanced system, I think that we're definitely, the goal here is to be less restrictive on this, because the starting point was a state rule saying no to anything in a zone 2. And I appreciate the comments and feedback today. I certainly am not trying to downgrade those, because they're important in us crafting this ordinance. But in regards of the restrictive and the intent, remember, we started with a letter from the state saying, according to state rules, there is nothing you can do in a zone 2. So we're trying to craft something into this to allow some flexibility.
Well, the packed bed media system was one example that I picked up briefly in reading this, is that that's a bit of a one-size-fits-all scenario in a zone 2 when the hydrology, the facts on the ground, you know,
And I
the
appreciate.
dirt can simply tell you
right.
something, you know, quite.
I greatly appreciate that point,
Mhm.
but remember that that's less restrictive than what we started with.
Okay, yeah, I
was all-
appreciate that.
That was all the point I was
Sure.
trying to make. I
Sure.
fully get what you're saying there, but it's definitely less restrictive than where we started.
I've run into the same issue in the past in development on road standards, you know, and at times when the county engineers, you know, have looked me in the face and say, yeah, it's frustrating, Tracy, because our hands are tied. We see that we'd love to be able to design more to the topography and not rip the heck out of this mountain, but unfortunately the ordinance says this, so we're gonna have to ask you to rip the heck out of the mountain. So as an example, it's just, it would be nice if we could craft these ordinances such that there's parameters, there's reasonable, you know, boundaries, but yet there's plenty of room to design to the topography, the ground, the facts that are there that you can work with in a specific situation.
And that's why we're having this work session
Yeah.
today, is to get that
Yeah,
feedback as
great.
we're crafting this particular piece of
Thanks for your time.
legislation.
Thanks. Thank you.
My name is Robert Anderson. I've lived in Cover Bridge for 30-some years, and we have our own water supply that is not affected by your ordinances at all. Our well is drilled down, and we're pulling water from 600 feet in an aquifer, and everything that comes out of there goes into the homes. And supposedly downstream, I would like to know if any studies have been made in the below the housing where the water goes into the ground in the spring. Like, it seldom ever reaches the river because the ground is so porous. You can dig a hole in the summer. I did with a backhoe down 9-10 feet, and it's dry. So any water coming downstream would have been there, and it wasn't there. On a personal note, I've lived up there. I have a second lot that I would like to sell, part of my retirement accruement, as it were. And it's affecting me personally because it's tied up my retirement. They've literally stolen my land, taken it away from me. It's unusable. I paid taxes on it for the last 30 years, and it doesn't seem just, because there's nobody that can tell me that they've run a test before it gets to the river, downstream of where our canyon is it's got any contamination anywhere in the soil. And that's my viewpoint on the thing. I don't know about all the technicalities of these proposed ridiculously new systems. Septic tanks have worked for thousands and thousands of years. And the water goes in, and 200 feet downstream, it's pure. And I just don't understand why we have to have this much bureaucracy involved in our life. You buy a piece of property as an investment. You want to live on it. I gardened on it. I've got fruit trees. I'm not able to do that anymore, and I need to put it on the market and sell it. That's my retirement money. I'm living on Social Security and just barely making it. And I'm just really distressed with all this stuff that's going on with these alternate systems that cost thousands and thousands of dollars. and are worn out in 20 years. That just doesn't seem logical to me. That's all I have to say on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. My name is Andrew James. I have owned land in Covered Bridge Canyon for 4 years now. I did the math on it just roughly. I'm in about $75,000 that I've lost thus far in interest payments, paying assistance to try to reach out to county, state members to try to get feedback and information back. It's been a frustrating situation. I think we've recognized that today. I do appreciate that we're here and this is a working session. I understand that. So Commissioner Ivey, Commissioner Lee, thank you so much thus far for helping us. Commissioner Ainge, appreciate your feedback. So one thing that's been very clear to me is that we're ready to come up with a solution. And if the solution is previously the state made it where we couldn't even build anything in a source 2 protection zone, and we're working to make that a more easy process, then what doesn't make sense to me is if the state, I just want to read it again, the state says these lots were platted and approved by the Land Use Authority prior to the time that the Source Protection Ordinance was adopted, and that the current proposed use, single-use residential, is consistent with the prior land use approval. So they're saying that building a home, a single land use, is prior. That's the state's interpretation. So when we're talking about how the county is trying to make it easier for us, they're actually not. They're going against what the state is saying. The state is saying that it's their interpretation that it's fine for us to build a single-use house on that land that was previously platted in the 1970s. But the county is saying no. So there's a misinterpretation there, and it's difficult for me to hear that the county is trying to make our lives easier when the state is saying that, hey, we're fine with it. In our interpretation, you should be able to build. So that really doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand that at all. Another great point that Bob brought up is we've been paying taxes on this land. You know, he's been there for 30 years. So if this does come to a head, if we're caused to pay $5 million to build these new septic tanks that have no scientific evidence that it's going to change anything whatsoever, then as a landowner there, and as all these homeowners in Covered Bridge Canyon, which pretty much everyone in here is from Covered Bridge Canyon, we're going to be very upset. And we're at a time where, you know, my $75,000, if this gets approved, if this new proposed literature also says something in there where it says that if Spanish Fork City, who we're trying to protect their water, if they say that we can use a traditional system, then why can't we use a traditional system? Why is the county making our life more difficult when you're trying to protect their water and they're saying we can use a traditional system? So I would propose in this working session that the literature, the new proposed literature, should say that if whatever water source you're trying to protect, if that city, if they say that we can use a traditional system, then we should be able to use a traditional system. It also should say that if there's no scientific data that makes us use a new upgraded system, then we shouldn't have to be forced to pay the $5 million and use a new system. So that would be my main thing. I know we're working towards a goal to get us to build, but the main thing that's left out is that there's not any literature being proposed that's saying that we can use a traditional system if the science backs it up, or if the city, in this case Spanish Fork City, says that we can use a traditional system. And from their studies that they did, everything shows that we can. So I would propose that should be put in there. I do appreciate Ben Vinoy. He has been probably the most responsive to my assistant reaching out almost every day. So I really appreciate Ben in that regard, but I do think that needs to be proposed in literature.
Thank you. I appreciate that comment.
You're up. Good morning, Robert Beers, Utah Department of Environmental Quality, the Division of Water Quality. I think that's an important distinction to make. There are two divisions. One covers drinking water, and they have the responsibility of maintaining the safety of public drinking water systems. The Division of Water Quality, where I work, our job is to protect ground and surface waters. I have, in my position, I'm the on-site program coordinator, manager. Those are septic systems, obviously. I have some concerns in general about the ordinance that's proposed. First, I think definitions 11 and 20 are redundant. I think definition 11, which covers on-site wastewater systems, That's the definition that's listed in water quality regulations, and definition 20, I think, is unnecessary, because that's all spelled out in definition number 11. Otherwise, my comments would include that throughout this ordinance, there's no mention of the Division of Water Quality. The only reference to any state agency is to the Division of Drinking Water, and where our agency covers the regulations and things that pertain to water quality and on-site systems, packed bed systems, so on and so forth. I think that I would hope that you would want Division of Water Quality's input at some point. Other issues that are a concern are there's no mention of what wastewater pollutants you're concerned with. It just says that there has to be treatment. It doesn't mention what treatment, it doesn't mention to what level, doesn't mention what pollutants are of concern you expect or hope to be addressed. Another issue that it's not mentioned is the degree of management that's expected, whether that's from the health department, special service district, community, county, whatever that may be. And those are the concerns that I have about this. I think some of those are important issues, and some of those issues, frankly, aren't being just dealt with in Utah County. They're points of concern throughout the state, and so, thank you.
Ask you a question, Robert?
Absolutely.
Your opinion on that grandfather clause statements that's been spoken back and forth?
Rather than speak about any specific issue that's been spoken of here, prior to my position here, which I began in November of 2017, I was the environmental health director in Southwest Utah Public Health. I was in that position for 6 years. Prior to that, I worked in public health for, altogether, it's been 25 years. But I have never heard of a situation where anyone from Division of Drinking Water or Division of Water Quality stated that it was prohibited to put septic systems in a Zone 2 drinking water source, Protection Zone 2. We had lots, in my experience in Southwest Utah, we had previously subdivided lots that were in Zone 2 after the ordinance was put in place, but because those lots were previously platted, we allowed septic systems, conventional septic systems in those areas.
So maybe just in general, talking about grandfather clauses.
And I should mention that that was in consultation with, in other areas, in some of the more rural areas of the state, we have just Department of Environmental Quality district engineers that we work closely with. My office was adjacent to the district engineer's office, so when we had those issues arise, that was something that we could, discuss frankly between each other. So it wasn't, I didn't feel it was just the health department's decision. It was also, it was the health department's decision with the full knowledge of the Department of Environmental Quality and their concurrence.
Yeah. So, I mean, two issues, talking about the grandfather clause. One, if the systems, obviously if the systems are causing health issues downstream, then that's a concern that's gonna have to be addressed, no matter
Absolutely.
what the issue is, right? No matter.
Not only
if
presently,
it's-
but in
yeah,
future,
if
which
it's
is
grandfathered or
predicted.
whatever, it has to be
Yes.
addressed. So with that understanding, typically do not grandfather clauses, just in general, the reason why we put those in place, and they don't have that nuisance factor or that downstream pollutant factor that it's a health issue. We put that in place so that we don't have a certain amount of taking that comes on where there's a change and now all of a sudden somebody's invested into property or whatever the case, and now there's gonna be, there would be a certain amount of taking that goes on. Is that a true statement? Is that relatively true?
I'm not sure what your question is.
The question comes in that if an individual or individuals, just in general, are doing something and then the government comes back in and steps in and wants to rezone it, redo it, requalify it, the grandfather clause is usually in place so that there's not a taking of either a right, property rights, or an ordinance change, so that it doesn't take some sort of right away from an individual. That's the reason why we do grandfathering clauses.
That's my understanding, and that was the interpretation that I was asked to operate under from my supervisors in previous positions and from elected officials as well.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for coming down.
And two quick points. One, to follow up on what you just said, Commissioner Lee. The two things that haven't been discussed, so we're not being redundant, is the one you just brought up, and that is eminent domain, the unintended consequences of a decision like this. And the other unintended consequence is for everyone in this room and from Covered Bridge Canyon to begin to meet with the Utah County tax assessor to have a reevaluation of our properties for our tax base.
Okay. Are you the fifth person?
I
Are you
don't
the,
know.
I can't remember. Oh, there was, okay, you and then one more after. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Deidre Beck. I'm with the Utah Division of Drinking Water. I work.
Tell me your name again, sorry.
Deidre Beck.
Deidre.
I work in the permitting section of the Division of Drinking Water in the source protection group. I've been there since April of 2016. Prior to that, I was in consulting where I prepared drinking water source protection plans as a licensed geologist that were obviously in accordance with our R309-600 rule. So just a couple of clarifications I wanted to make on statements that were made about the proposed ordinance amendments. One thing to keep in mind that was, you had questions about the zones and if there's the ability to revise those zones and who makes those decisions. And just to be clear, those revisions still would be going through the Division of Drinking Water and being approved by our licensed professionals. And then adopted, and the zones would be changed. We do have concerns about the language that we are the data steward of that data, obviously, but there are inconsistencies in the way we found them. I found them since I started in April of 2016. Just human error, issues where zones were updated and they were never actually put into the system, not just in Utah County and other counties. So while I understand that that the county wants to use our zones, and we do recommend that people utilize that data because it's out there, it also probably needs to be gut checked when there's a situation where a building permit or somebody comes in for a building permit and they're not sure, are they in a zone 2? The original maps really should be consulted, just because there are issues in past data projects or data audit projects. So that's my first comment. My second comment would be that, like Robert Beers already said, the Division of Water Quality also should be part of this process and should be referenced in the ordinance, not just Division of Drinking Water, since they are the one responsible for on-site wastewater systems. So an important clarification too is that the Division of Drinking Water regulates public water systems. We don't regulate septic systems. So the conversation is an interpretation of our rules that basically, and it's confusing. Lots of people don't understand it. But essentially, we have pollution sources defined in R309-600, and those include septic systems and other types of point discharges of pollution, or point sources. And for new sources of drinking water, which that's kind of this grandfathering thing, is in our rule, we have kind of a grandfather clause where we say if a system was using a source prior to 1993, or July 1993, when this was adopted, then their source could be considered existing under our rules. And then any sources developed after 1993 are considered new. And so a new source of drinking water has to go through what's called a preliminary evaluation report process. And that process is where we can actually state, and this is where a public water system comes to us and says, we want to put a new well in or a new spring, new intake, and we want to, and these are the potential contamination sources located within the, best guess as far as the zones, because oftentimes there's not site-specific information yet. And if the pollution sources exist and within those zones, then we can potentially say, sorry, we can't approve this source, you can't put this source here. And the clarification on the protected aquifer is important because in our rules, under R309-613, we state that you cannot have in a protected aquifer, a PWS, so a public water system, shall not locate a new groundwater source of drinking water where an uncontrolled potential contamination source or a pollution source exists within Zone 1. That's for a protected aquifer situation. For an unprotected aquifer, we go further and we say that the same condition apply that I just read, and that additionally, a new groundwater source may not be located where a pollution source exists within Zone 2 unless the pollution source implements design standards which prevent contaminated discharges to groundwater. So we would not prohibit, if it were a well that could prove that it was being developed from a protected aquifer, we would not prohibit septic systems in Zone 2 for that well. So it's not a carte blanche, Zone 1, Zone 2 can't have septic systems located within them. It depends on the type of aquifer. And in the situation with Covered Bridge, it's a spring. Springs are never considered protected, so it applies to Zones 1 and 2. So the other issue that we had was the amendment to allow the, at first when I read this, I thought that it was actually a resident, but it does say the public water system can receive concurrence or verification from the Utah State Division of Drinking Water and ask for these letters that you have seen for the Covered Bridge development that we've issued now for Spanish Fork City, and we've also issued to Covered Bridge HOA water system. And there is a concern on our part that that's going to be an expansion of our mandate if we continue to get these requests from the individual water systems to request concurrence on something that really isn't in our rules. So I think also the letter that we've been that has been read multiple times, maybe there's a little bit of a misunderstanding in one part of that letter where it states, but this does not fall under any purview of our laws, and that's because we don't regulate septic systems. We're not the land use authority. We regulate public water systems. And so the statement was more to the effect that we don't have anything to basically grant an exception to because under our rules, there's nothing to grant an exception to. And so to clarify too, if you have an existing source of drinking water and they came into a source prior to 1993 and they'd updated their plan and new septic systems had moved into those zones, we would not disapprove that plan because new septic had gone into those zones because it's considered an existing source of drinking water and it doesn't fall under R309-613. And I think that's it unless you guys have questions. No, the Spanish Fork City springs there's two springs in which that are the impacts. Yeah, Covered Bridge Canyon has a well and a spring that's supposedly inactive. The well is hydraulically upgrading of their septic systems. And so we're talking about Spanish Fork City Springs, sorry.
All right, thank you. We have one more that's gonna comment. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Robert Stevens, Provo, Utah. I'd like to ask some questions on the science of this. The water that we drink, where does it come from? Well, as far as I understand, it's been down there for millions of years, at the least thousands of years. It comes from deep in the depth of the Rocky Mountains, and it migrates west. The average household uses 600 gallons of water a day. There's over 100,000 households. There's a lot of moving water here. We're not drinking water from Utah Lake. Utah Lake is a source of pollution from Geneva Steel and from decades of waste just being sent into the lake. So one of the questions I have is, is soil a filter? And how many feet of soil is an acceptable filter for any kind of pollution into the underground water system? Well drillers in the county are drilling wells at a depth of 700 feet deep. Is that enough? In my property down there in Benjamin, it's 140 feet deep. Is that enough as a filter? Well, if you go out and read on the EPA website, they say that a wastewater treatment system should be 4 feet above the underground water level. That's not very many. And so they believe in that few number of feet, that's going to act as an adequate amount of soil to go and filter out any kind of contaminants which could enter into the groundwater system. Now, when we talk about groundwater, there is the underground water system, which if you just dig a hole, eventually you'll hit water. And then we have our drinking water system, which is way deeper. And so if the soil is able to go and filter out nitrates, which I understand now is the issue, a couple of years ago, it was arsenic. And I want to go ahead and bring to your attention that the science on that was based upon a group of people in western Utah who had extremely high levels of arsenic. And the government reduced it down into a statistic, and they said, you will probably have a shorter life if you're drinking high levels of arsenic, but it only affected the men and not the women. You know, and so where's the science in all that? I would like to establish that we have overexcited individuals in the health department who feel it's their duty to protect the health of the public at the expense of liberty, and it is not science. And if we are interested in science, then there are things we can do. For example, let's measure in the underground the underground water and the drinking water levels of nitrates now. And let's say, well, are they near drinking sources? Or where are the nitrates from? At our house, I don't allow our kids to have sandwich meats because they have high levels of nitrate. And so I've already solved that issue in my house. I also want to go congratulate the first man who spoke and talk about animals. I can have a farm and have lots of animals, all contaminating my soil, and the health department makes no regulations about that. They're not worried about that. Animals are clean, humans are dirty. You know, it's just completely illogical. And for you, as people who are not trained in the scientific method, to establish rules and generic regulations across the board is just ridiculous. It has to be based on science. You have to have a proven science that is reproducible, and you don't have that. I also want to say that a packed bed media system adds $30,000 to $50,000 of cost to a private wastewater treatment system. For a person now in the county who wants to go and buy a piece of land and do all the improvements required from the county, you're talking at least $100,000, and if you add another $30,000 to $50,000, $130,000 to $150,000 on top of the land. What you are is anti-farming. You are pro-imports. If the imports stop because of an EMP, because of a World War III or something, we all die. Because your policies are no new farms. Farms are evil. Farms contaminate the water and so forth. And as a result, no new farms are organizing. You've been successful at that, at the expense of having to pack all the people into 4% of land here in the county, driving the prices up and up and up, and causing our children to have to leave the area, while 96% of the land resides in unincorporated areas in the county, which is too expensive to go buy and build it now. Your policies are wrong. Your science is wrong, and you're basing it upon the opinion of one or two individuals in the health department who have misplaced priorities. Thank you very much.
right, thank you. And for those that are here from Cover Bridge after what happened last year with the fires, we are glad that you're here. So thank you for coming and participating in this. Work session is really to kind of ferret out and talk about all the issues. There will be more. I'm sure that Ben was over there taking a lot of notes, and there'll be some thought process. I'm sure that every one of the commissioners, if you'd like to visit with us, please come by and talk with us, because you can't talk it all out in a work session. It's just kind of start the conversation. The policy part of this does reside with the county commissioners, and hopefully if the policy is right, then the interpretation from the lawyers' offices and so forth will be adequate as well. And so thank you for coming and participating with us in that discussion. We'll now move to the next work session item. Thank you. Sure. Okay. If I can figure it out.
The order of it.
Yeah.
Let's see, what's Richard doing?
In case you ask hard questions, then you go up here.
You got it.
Which one we looking at?
Yeah, we're going into the next work session.
Oh, sorry, I thought you
Yeah.
were doing, sorry.
Yeah.
I thought you were on
Next,
number one.
I thought maybe you're jumping right up. Okay, do we need to take a break, or are we good to just go roll?
We can do this one and then take a break, because
Yeah, okay.
so.
Fair enough. So now we've got our next work session item, which is to discuss the formation of Good Governance Authority Board, and Commissioner Ainge.
Yeah, I can give a little bit of a introduction to this, why we're discussing it today. I think that there's a couple of reasons why this is on today's agenda as a work session. The first is, state law allows us to consider the optimal form of government for our county. And, we're experiencing an incredible amount of growth and transformation in our county. I think it's always helpful to ask that question: what is the right form for our long-term future? We've also had our fair share of dysfunction and periods of frustration with the county commission, and so I think that kind of precipitates the need to have this discussion. And then lastly, in the last couple of weeks, there's been a citizens group that has filed a petition to put a modified form of government on the ballot. And I actually think that petition was placed on the ballot. One was a fellow commissioner, Commissioner Ivey. It was done by other members of the community who I respect, and I think that their intentions and motivations are in the right place. I am proposing this approach because this is the preferred path that I would take, and there's a few reasons to that. One is, we only have the chance to do this once. It affects many generations. That might not technically be true, but the reality is we don't want to do this multiple times. And so I think it's important to get it right. Also, as it goes to the ballot, there's multiple options under state law for the modified form of government. But when it's placed on the ballot, there's only one option. We can't do multiple choice for the voters and say, pick what you'd like. And so, as a citizen, I would feel perhaps frustrated if, when such a fundamental question is placed on the ballot and I only have one choice, and there was never an opportunity for a public debate or discussion or analysis of what was that choice that's placed on the ballot. And so, for these reasons, I'm proposing that we form a good government advisory board. Let's bring together some of the best minds in the county. Let's draw upon the resources that we have at BYU and UVU, and ask this committee or this independent board to ask these questions. And I think I've outlined here in this kind of draft composition of the board that there's a few reasons for this. They can do research and analysis and provide recommendations to the commission. They can talk about the timing and really take a vote of the members of the body and make strong recommendations. I also think it's important that as commissioners, we have some personal conflicts in this. This potential change can affect things like whether commissioners can seek reelection, whether it switches from a full-time to a part-time thing. And so I think those are important questions. It very much might be the case that those modifications are better for the county, but I think by having an independent board, it kind of alleviates some of those conflicts. So I've put a list of questions together that I would want this committee to ask. Because again, another reason why this is important to me is it's not simply the headline of this, of, okay, which form of government is ideal. It's also, there's a lot of detail. Because whatever is voted on has to be implemented and becomes law. So it's things like, if there is geographic districting, what are the lines of those geographic districts? If there is an effect of terms, what's the right staggering of terms? What's the proposed, or what's the budgetary impact of all of this? Well, how does it affect staff of the county? So there's a lot of deep questions that I just think this is important that we have public debate and analysis, and a lot of people can feel like they're a part of it, and that this committee, if composed with the proper members, it can really come together, make a recommendation, and then the people of the county can ultimately make their vote. So to me, I feel much more comfortable taking that approach, and so that's why I want to put this on a work session to discuss the formation of this board.
I appreciate, Commissioner Ainge, you're looking into this and reading down through it. As you did mention, I am a signer on that petition. As I mentioned last week, I strongly support the change in the form of government. I've lived in this unincorporated county since 2003. I can attest to the fact that it's not a personal problem with elected officials. It's a structural problem with the form of government we have, because we do not have checks and balances in place. We do not have separation of powers. We try and combine all of the legislative, administrative, and judicial branches of good governance into one body, and that consolidates power and it creates problems. I've lived under the tyranny of a commission since I moved here, and I want it changed. That's why I signed the petition. Part of the reason that I signed the petition is the petition did have about 3 years of research go into it. We've looked at various forms of government, not just in this state, but in other states that oversee counties, and we've modeled it very closely to the founders, to the way this country was founded. And I believe that the founders were very spot on when they separated powers, when they give each distinctive branch of government responsibilities, and separated those out and put checks in place. They put veto powers in place. They put override powers in place. And as we've gone through the petition, we've done a lot of that. We certainly do need to have public discussion on it. Part of why I was okay with this petition is because as it goes forward to collect signatures and move, it will drive public debate. In relationship to an exact proposal for a board, if we craft the board in such a manner and it makes sense, I'm not necessarily objected to that. I do, however, feel that we've done our homework on the petition, so I certainly wouldn't withdraw my support of that and fully intend to push it forward. And would be happy if this is formed to receive recommendations, and that's part of why I wanted to be a regional signer, is because as a body of 5, we can make modifications to that as those suggestions come forward. So I would make that particular point that it is not a set in stone thing, that anything brought to the original 5 signers, we can make modifications to that petition at any point in time. So any recommendations brought forward by a member of the public or a advisory board or, anyone for that matter would certainly be taken into consideration in that.
Right. I would be in favor of doing something of this nature. In looking back, one of our oldest forms of government in this country is, in essence, a county commission form. It varies. I mean, we had variations of this even before we found our independence. And so they kept that model in place even after our independence was won, and they formed it on a federal level, and gave the states the power. Now, I find it interesting as you look across the country, how that is really different. They call them different things. They have different powers. There's some commissions that have no legislative power at all. They have administrative only. Others are like ours. The state has given us a lot of latitude and kind of pushed it on down, which I don't agree with. The thing that I like about having a board formed like this and trying to take the let's just say the emotion out of it, is that I don't know what, I mean, I can't, if somebody was gonna ask me and say, you tell me what's gonna be the best form of government for the future for Utah County, would I be able to sit down and say, yes, A, B, and C, this is it? I wouldn't. I wouldn't think that I could just lay that out and say for the next 50 years, this will suit. But I think that together, if we try to get academia involved, have it data-driven, have it open and transparent so everyone can see the process as we're going down through it, so there's nothing hidden behind it, it gives us a better opportunity, because we are governed by the consent of the people, and I think that's important that we try to find if different forms, and there's so many different forms out there, it's unbelievable. What is right and wrong? What works and what doesn't? Is there any form of government that is just absolutely perfect? No way. There's not one. There's going to be pluses and minuses with every single one of them to a certain extent. And so how does that impact? And I think that going through a study process in which we do that with individuals, hopefully we can take that emotion out of it, would be very favorable, and I think it would be in the best interest of the citizens, myself included as a citizen of the county, to have something like this set up that's just looked down through all the way so that we can find a way to, eventually after time, put this on a ballot and say, what if we went this direction? And we can back it up with data and with reason, with logic, and try to take the emotion of it out and find a way that we can bring everybody along so that we don't have a conflict or a fight. So I personally would be in favor of setting something up like this, moving it forward, recognizing that there is a petition out there. I realize the petition has that first standing, no doubt. I know that. I know it has the first standing. It kind of bothers me a little bit when I hear that we can submit to the petitioners and there's 5 members that get to decide if they want to move forward with it or not. I think that excludes 600,000 people out there who maybe would like to do something a little differently. So I do have some concerns with that. I mean, obviously, looking at the pluses and minuses of all types of forms of government would be important for us to look at, instead of just saying this is the one, this is the only way, and there's a handful of people who get to decide how it's going to look and when it goes onto a ballot. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Paul, I think that you might be prepared to speak a little bit during this work session on this.
Yeah, well, I think the only thing I would add are things that you probably all are aware of, that, yeah, the petitioners are kind of in this first position. The process that Commissioner Ainge is talking about here is not the statutory process that would initiate the change of form of government, and you all realize that. This is sort of an ad hoc committee to advise the commissioners. I suppose a benefit of that is that if the petition fails for lack of signatures, the county commission would sort of be more prepared, or soon thereafter, to possibly be able to recommend a form of government change if that is what's recommended and that's what the commission would like to do. So there's that possible benefit as well. Other than that, I was just going to answer questions that maybe the commissioners had concerning the process.
One question that I had is about what Commissioner Ivey mentioned, is that let's say that we do begin a study For example, there are, as I mentioned, there's the kind of the headline proposed changes, and then there's all of the detail. And I myself have noticed a few oversights, and I think other members of the community have noticed some oversights in the petitioner's plan. So I was under the impression that if we formed this advisory committee, ultimately, the commission could put forward something to the people to be voted on. But is there the opportunity for the petitioners to modify their plan, and what is the latitude they have to make those modifications?
There is some level of latitude. I think that we need to be careful, though, because the statute requires that the plan be attached to the petition signature process. And so as the plan goes out and as people go and collect signatures, the proposed plan is supposed to be attached to that. And so the voters are going to be considering whether or not to sign the petition, and they'll have the ability to review that plan. However, the statute does specifically talk about, so I don't really read a lot of leeway in the statute to amend the plan
Once we've gathered
completely
signatures.
freely. Yeah.
I think that's the clarification point, right? Once the signature gathering has commenced, is what you're trying to say?
Yeah, once we have the signatures out, once the signature gatherers go out, they're carrying with them a plan that they're representing to the voters. That will be the plan, and the voters are signing based on that. Now, even after the signatures are gathered, and if they're successful, and the petition is certified by the clerk auditor's office, at that point, there would be a review conducted by the county attorney's office. The statute specifically allows the sponsors to amend the plan after a review by the county attorney's office. So if the county attorney comes back and says there's an unconstitutional provision or there's an unlawful provision, the statute does allow the sponsors to amend the plan, at least to fix that issue. Now, I was talking to Josh Daniels earlier. It's kind of interesting that we can sort of go back and fix a plan after the voters sign, but the statute does allow for an amendment. It specifically allows for an amendment at that point.
But it's unclear how large or how significant of an amendment that could be.
Right. Certainly, I mean, I would probably really have some heartache or take pause if you say, we proposed one, I'm an executive council, and now we're going to amend it to a council manager, or something like that. I mean, that would be probably too extreme of an amendment. Between that and the minor amendments, it's kind of unclear from reviewing the statute how free and how flexible you could be in amending the plan at that point. But it does specifically allow to amend, at least to correct any issues that the county attorney sees with it.
Which is gonna be legal,
Right. Yeah.
legal issues.
Okay. That's helpful.
I was going to say the statute does specifically state the county attorney review different sections that the county attorney is supposed to review. It's in section 406, if anybody wants to review it.
So, and at the moment, the commission, there's nothing that the commission can do to act. That we could form this body could conduct a study, but as long as the petition group is out there, the commissioners are not able to make a recommendation to voters or.
That's right.
anything like that.
That's right. The county legislative body may not officially initiate this process while this petition process is underway. Also, I think I've talked to a few people about this. The petitioners, in fact, my reading of the statute, the petitioners themselves are limited as to when and how they can withdraw their petition. They could withdraw their petition, but they would need the unanimous approval of all the sponsors, and in this case there are 5 sponsors, I believe. And of course, if it dies for lack of signatures, there's no need to voluntarily withdraw it. But if the signature
There's a
gathering,
6-month period for them to obtain the sufficient number of signatures.
yes, they have 6 months from the date that they filed their notice of intent to collect signatures. If they are successful in that, they would have a window of time where they could still withdraw the petition. And basically, it's contained here in the code in section 303, subpart 5. They can withdraw anytime within 90 days of certification, so long as it's not later than 45 days before the election. And so there would be a possibility to withdraw the petition. One point on that is that there would be, on the petition signatures, the sponsors would need to include a phrase, some language on there, reserving the right to withdraw. So if they don't have that language on the signature sheets, then they couldn't even withdraw it then. But if they have language that is notifying the voters out there that they are reserving the right to withdraw, then they can exercise that right within a window of time.
Would the current petitioners be able to make that amendment?
Well, that would need to be on the petition itself. So they couldn't add it after signatures were collected. They would need to have it on there before the signatures are collected.
So, if I'm understanding that timeline, they could be successful in obtaining the signatures in the
Yeah.
6-month period, and then be certified. And that could be a period of a couple of months or a few months, all the way
We'd
up
have to ask Ms.
until,
Powers how long it would take to certify, but
all the way up until 45 days prior to the election, with unanimous consent of the petition sponsors, they would be able to withdraw.
so yeah, that would be probably like mid-September in there somewhere.
Okay.
45 days before the January, or the November election.
Has the packets been given in the way of the?
No.
Just push the very top of that push button.
Give her access.
There we
Justin.
go. Had to hit the very top of the button. Thank you, Commissioner. We have not issued the packets yet. Right now, as it sits, there are some blatant, glaring flaws in the petition. So after we had Paul look at it, just simple things like numbers not quite adding up. So we wanted to give the petitioners a chance to correct that, because once they start gathering signatures, I don't feel comfortable with any major changes being made. So, and some of the numbers not adding up was the number of commissioners, for example. That's quite, even though it's a number, it's a major change. So I wanted to give them a chance to modify that prior to issuing those packets.
Numbers of commissioners, I'm a little confused on that one, because we're changing to a council mayor form.
Council members, sorry, not
Okay.
commissioners, council members. Yeah, so if you look at the first page of the petition, I know that there was some talk of 5 council members versus 7 council members. And when the petition got put together, those were not rectified. So in some places it looks like 7, and in some places it looks like 5.
Okay, my understanding from the drafter is that was fixed and submitted, so we'll need to review that thoroughly.
There were still a few issues, but then we had sent it for review again.
But that's why we go through the review process on any of these, so.
The reason why I asked the question is because I think state law was changed so that the actual 6-month period of time doesn't start until they actually have the petition, that.
My review of state law shows that the 6-month period begins on the date that they initially filed their notice of intent to gather signatures. So that would be on January 9th. We did read through the optional plan, the proposed plan, and there were a few glaring inconsistencies, council members being probably the most important one. And I believe we notified the sponsors. Now, that was simply, in my mind, just a friendly notification that, hey, your plan appears to have a couple of flaws in it that you may want to correct. That was certainly not the attorney review spoken of in statute that would take place after certification. But as far as deadlines go, Section 303 is clear that it's 180 days after the notice of intent is filed. Technically, the sponsors don't need the clerk auditor's approval before signatures can be gathered. I do think that
Don't they have to have correct forms, though, to put it on, that is issued by the clerk auditor's office?
I don't think so.
No, they just need to meet the certain standards, so.
Certainly, it would be a good idea that we're on the same page, so that Amelia and her staff
Yeah.
can certify the signatures.
As long as the forms they use contain the correct items that comply with code, we will accept that. So we don't actually have to create that form for them.
But I think that she's willing to.
What I've seen from citizens petitions in the past is that it has the change, it has the signature pages, all their information, which you can copy and get as many as you want, as in certain packets. And, and then, whatever they say, you have to read this to them, or you have to express that this is what this is that you're signing. I'm just wondering
Right.
if that's not the case.
No,
it's
those
just
are from
signatures.
sections of code that spell it out really clearly about what the signature page should include. In fact, in the state code, in the referendum initiative section, it tells you how wide the row should be, how many rows and columns are on each page, the title of, it goes through in painstaking detail what those signature pages look like. And in this case, there's just simply not that level of detail. And in the other cases where, this feels kind of like maybe it's a regular petition gathering process, like a referendum or an initiative, or even for somebody running for elective office. But in this case, it just simply says gather signatures of a sufficient number.
So
And it does not reference going back to, gather signatures in a similar way or as gathered in this other process. It doesn't really spell it out.
Is there a verification process? I mean, the signature gatherers have to sign a page that they attest that they were there in person. Is any of those things written in there, or is it just go get a bunch of signatures?
That's not in this section.
Interesting.
Just one other question. I know we do have some public comment. So is there anything, if we form this good government advisory board, is there anything prohibiting one of the study topics that we ask them to study to look at the existing petition plan and offer their insights onto that?
No, I think for this idea of establishing a good government advisory board, I think the commissioners have wide latitude. Again, you're not technically operating under the advisory or the study committee in statute, and so this would be your own committee that you would task with studying whatever it is that you would want them to study. And so you could have them study the proposed plan and give a specific recommendation on that if you would like. But I think as a board of commissioners, I think you have wide latitude to give direction to this board and to have them give you advice and counsel on whatever it is almost that you'd like.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want to speak to it?
So Brian Chapman, Spanish Fork, the contact sponsor of the petitioners. So I have two concerns with what you guys have been discussing. One is we have submitted some fixes that were brought up by the county attorney's office. We appreciated that we had some errors that we fixed. That has already been submitted. It should have been given and already done. If there is further concerns, we'd be happy to look at those, but we haven't heard anything of any further errors or glaring errors or anything since we submitted those fixes. And then two, we have been told by the county elections office that we were supposed to wait to get a packet from you guys as the county. That was the last communication I have. I have the voicemail that I can even play that said that you would be giving us that. If that's not the case, I have concerns because we've been holding and not doing anything of gathering signatures specifically because of that direction.
So what we're waiting on, since the fixes came, now we're waiting on the official legal opinion, and then we'll send you a PDF, and then that PDF can be modified. So that's why I'm saying we can give you that petition as soon as we get the legal back, but you can modify the petition we give you, right? So if you want to serialize, if you want to put a serial number on the packets or things, we're fine with you modifying it. You don't have to use what we give you as long as you have the correct elements. But so we will provide you a PDF of what the wording needs to be as soon as we have the legal.
And so we do understand, as in other petitions and initiatives, that there are certain elements that we can change, but it is our understanding from your office that we couldn't even do anything until we received the packet from you.
Yeah, we need to see at least the wording from us. Yeah, and we're just waiting on the final legal opinion before we can provide you that wording.
And I do have concerns if we are going to be saying and arguing that the 180 days is going to be held, that we would appreciate that sooner rather than later, because this is now affecting the petitioner's rights to actually gather signatures, since it has been at least, and I can't remember when the change was submitted, but it's been at least a week since we submitted that.
That's a fair concern. I mean, we had the law changed on citizens petitions just because of the possibility of, some of that being held, so.
Yeah, and the concerns.
So it's fair.
Appreciate it, thank you.
This is Paul Jones from the Civil Attorney's Office. I had a personal discussion with Mr. Chapman, and I thought I made it really clear that you did not need a legal opinion from me. That I pointed out, hey, your numbers aren't adding up here, but that's just a friendly comment that it's a little confusing in the plan as to actually how many council members are being suggested, but that the official attorney review takes place after voter certification. And I thought I made that.
Okay, so I'm now
I'm
confused
not referring
because
to that.
Amelia
Oh,
said
okay.
she was waiting for legal review before she sent us anything.
Yeah, I'm referring to the signature packets themselves. I did appreciate it, and
Right.
we did understand that from you. We got it, and I wish I remembered his name. It was someone from the elections office that called when I had specifically asked about the packets and whether we are supposed to be doing that ourselves or whether the county would be providing those to us. And we were told that the county would be providing the packets, not the legal review.
Oh, okay, certainly that's that is definitely probably the pattern that the elections office is used to, because in every other scenario, they are supposed to provide that signature packet.
So I was just brought up to speed that the elections office was confused. So this is a very specific petition for change of governance, and the laws around this petition are different than every other petition. And so they gave you the information for every other petition, not realizing that this one type of petition has a separate carve-out in the law just for it. So I apologize for that, but we can get you, so apparently with this one, you don't even have to wait for the legal opinion because of this very narrow type of petition it is. You can start gathering signatures immediately. But I would recommend updating the petition before doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, and
So
I think
apologize, yeah.
and I think just as a matter of cooperation, the clerk's office will be willing to provide you with a packet template so that you are gathering the appropriate kinds of information with your signatures.
Okay, clear as mud. We'll bring it back to the governance board, commissioners, comments.
Commissioner, I'm sorry. Let me just say, can that be provided to them today? This is Robert Moore, County Attorney's Office.
Yes, it can.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other comments? All right. Finally get into our meeting. How about that? Okay. Richard, now we're gonna go back to our agenda, and first up is number one, it's to approve and authorize Utah County Commission Chair to execute a franchise agreement. My question on here as I was reading down through it is it makes reference to 3.5% of annual gross revenues that would come to the county. Do we have any idea what that looks like? Do they give you any projections, or are we agreeing to this and that revenue stream is $50? I mean, I don't know what that.
I don't have any feel for it. I don't know. Anthony will help Glenn with this.
Yeah, this
as well.
is Anthony Lubay with the County Attorney's Office. So I was working with Prestige Broadband. They don't have a current projection of their revenue, at least that I'm aware of. They're okay with the 3.5%. With this situation, how it works is that they handle purely internet, so they don't have to deal with any of the cable provider provisions in the Utah code. So they receive permission from Springville and have a franchise agreement for 3.5% of whatever revenue they generate. And so when we were doing our franchise agreement, we modeled our fees to be kind of in comparison to what they would be paying to Springville. Historically, the county has charged about 3.5% as well. So that's not anything unusual. But as far as going forward, it'll depend on how many subscribers they get to those different areas.
And usually franchises have boundaries. Do we know what that boundary is?
For this one, it's Utah County. The past ones we looked at were fairly broad as well. The reason for that is what kind of reins it in is that they have to get approval for any building permits.
Right.
And so while they'll have permission to put lines down, that's all contingent upon approval from Public Works, making sure that they're okay with it.
I think their initial build is looking in Hobble Creek Canyon.
Right.
That's the nexus with Springville, but it could go on, elsewhere in the county.
Okay. My other question is that it comes along with, in some of the bigger cities, I hear them complaining all the time that they have these rights of way. This one here looks like you have to go through the building, permit process. But you have these companies that come in and they rip up the streets and they put their cabling down, and then you patch it, make sure it's all good, and then the next week or next month, another company comes in and they rip up the streets, and they do it again, and it seems to be a never-ending cycle. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know how you coordinate, because you're trying to coordinate businesses that have. Is there any thought to that, or is there any way that we can?
One of the things that
Sensitive
we've
to it?
tried to do with, like in the subdivision process, is we have new underground utilities going in, is we ask the developers to contact the various providers, and if they would like to put conduit or a line in the ground when the power trench is open, to do it at that same time. In a lot of cases like this, with what Prestige is doing in Hollow Creek Canyon, it's going to be more than likely overhead in most locations and attached to the power poles. So that's, in a lot of the cases out in the unincorporated areas of the county, it is going to be overhead. So that's just, it's one of those things we try to coordinate it as best we can and minimize the road cuts wherever we can, but
Yeah.
we don't have that really good crystal ball that helps us
I
figure
know.
out who's
I
gonna
just-
wanna come next.
I just hate to see a brand new road, and
I agree.
the next year they're got this big trench down it. They're trying to patch it.
Fortunately, in most of our areas, we have unpaved shoulders that we can have them, trench in the shoulders rather than out in the pavement, and have them bore underneath the asphalt in a lot of locations.
Other questions? Motion to be in order.
I move that we approve item 1 from the consent agenda.
Second?
We got a motion and a second to approve item number 1 on our consent agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That passes 3-0. Okay. Number 2 on our regular agenda is next up is to approve top property tax actions that are included in the recommendation letters. Seems like you're just up here, Paul, or you're still sitting down there.
Gonna get a heavy dose of me today.
From my notes, which you previously mentioned, There
Yeah,
was.
sorry about that. I
there
jumped the
was-
gun by, what, 2 hours on that one?
Yeah, you did.
Way to be proactive, Paul.
Yeah.
Proud of you.
The Franklin schools have asked for continuance for 2 weeks.
Mhm.
Right? You have
Yes,
that
that's right,
same
yeah.
note? I don't have any problem with that.
Oop.
Commissioners, okay. And then going back, and sorry, I'm gonna try to get there real quick on this. Can we talk about the Beckstrom?
Yes. There was one of these that Jim Stevens told me the owner may show up here. Was it? Did Jim leave us? Oh, there he is. Was it this one or was it a different one? This one? Oh, I guess she's not here.
The reason why I bring this up, there's a recommendation or, it's been reviewed. The assessor's recommendation was to approve.
Right.
Recommendation evaluation.
Yes, the assessor recommended to approve, and I recommended to deny. So we are at a split here. And on this one, and if, of course, if anybody from the assessor's office would like to speak to it, I would not oppose to that. I would not be opposed to that. Here, they're claiming that there was a factual error on the property, a 2-story versus a 1.5-story, and different square footage, and that made their value be increased. And it looks like they went through and fixed that, and that the assessor's office has fixed that, and their value has been adjusted down, and their taxes have been lowered. The reason
the
that I,
future.
oh, go ahead.
For the future, right?
For the future,
Right.
right. And in their statement, they commented that over the past several years, they felt like their taxes were increasing, and there's a process to go through to fix factual error. And in fact, we allow factual errors to be that you can apply to have your value reduced due to factual error for additional months after the regular appeal process. And so my recommendation for denial is simply based on that there's a process to go through it, through the BOE. They didn't do it for a lot of years, and when they came forward to fix it, we fixed it. But that the recommendation here is to go back and fix, I think it's about 5 years worth of that difference.
And the assessor's saying approve it for the 2013 through 2017.
Yeah, the assessor says, yeah, let's go ahead and fix it for the last 5 years.
I'm good fixing it for the last 5 years. I like the assessor.
I mean, if,
Well, I
Not
like the
that I
assessor
dislike
too.
you,
I like the
Paul.
assessor too.
I mean, we technically say that if we looked at it, that the fact is that it was higher.
Well, to be
Right.
clear,
But
well,
you're
okay,
saying the process is, for factual errors, we have a process to go through.
right.
That process is a process to go through, but we still have the ability to do something different than going all the way through that process.
Right, yeah, that's a good point. Actually, at this point, the Board of County Commissioners cannot change the value for the previous years. What you can do is you can say that under 1347, it would be in the best interest of the state of Utah and the best interest of the county for you to simply refund a certain tax amount to this taxpayer. And the effect of it would be as if they had a lower value, but you can't change the value at this point.
I just like the fact that there's actually a disagreement between you and the assessor, and I want Chris to talk.
Oh, sure, yeah. We might disagree, but Chris and I are never disagreeable with each other. So.
What's that total amount that would be refunded back? I was trying to find that. I saw the difference in values, but
$5,907.50.
not insignificant by any stretch.
No, it's about over $1,000 a year.
Yeah, okay. I feel the same way with that. Any thoughts on that? Okay. The next one, and if I skip one or anything, please just jump in if you have concern, is the Goodrich.
In Goodrich, they purchased their home in August of 2018, and this is an issue that we see come before us almost on a weekly occurrence. When you buy your property, especially that late in the year, you're not going to get your valuation notice. And in this case, they weren't even able to get the tax notice because closing and recording takes some time. That's why at closing, it's always a good idea to go ahead and pay up those taxes. In this case, they didn't do that at closing, and the tax notice simply went to the previous owner who had owned it for most of 2018. And so they I believe they received the delinquency notice in January, which is not at all surprising since they bought the home in August of the year. It was too late for the county to get them a valuation or a tax notice, and they're asking for their penalty.
I don't see any interest. Is it 2130?
Yeah.
I personally don't see any problem with that one, considering that there was things that happened. They didn't get the notice. It was
Yeah,
after.
my recommendation is based on the fact that we didn't do anything wrong. That's
And that's
a
true.
process that it would normally go
It is
through. but-
Absolutely true. Nothing was done wrong there. It's just,
And they should have probably taken care of that at closing. But again, here, I think just to be clear,
we did collect the tax. I believe they already paid it. Everything's been paid.
yeah, I was just
It's
gonna
that
comment that
$21.30.
the treasurer's office actually recommended to grant this.
I think it
I'm
was-
split again
I
with,
think it was the treasurer and the recorder seemed to favor it, if I remember correctly on that. Wasn't there?
Yeah, he deferred.
oh yeah, the recorder's was a little less, you know, she said maybe, but
Okay. Thoughts on that one?
I would go with the treasurer's recommendation on this one.
Okay, I'm skipping that next one unless you want to bring it up. And I'm skipping the Partridge one. Unless there's comments on it. Franklin Schools, we're going to continue that for 2 weeks. And I'm trying to get to the Brennan plat. So I'm skipping the penalty. You want to talk about the,
you talking about plat?
yeah,
Okay, it appears that the Platts attempted to pay their property tax through a website, which I believe we have, that we allow people to pay their property tax. Their official payments is the website that you can go to and make your tax payment through a credit card or by some other means. And in this case, they tried to pay their property tax through this website, and the funds were never transferred. They weren't received through the website. So there's some discussion about why that may have been, but ultimately the taxes were paid late, and I think he's requesting that his penalty be waived.
right, not the tax, just the penalty of $30-something, if I'm 39, 38, 36. So can we, when you looked into it, there was an attempt to pay it on time, and it was, so everything was,
I think there's no
There's no
dispute.
doubt.
I think there's no dispute that he tried to pay on time.
and we don't know if it's I mean, I'm assuming it was probably on his side somehow that it just didn't make it through, or is there a combination of ours, or what's the case with that?
Well, I don't think that we have great answers on that. It may have been the type of account that he was trying to get the funds from. It wasn't really a credit card or kind of a typical checking account. I think it was some sort of a brokerage account. But it was a non-transaction account. And from what I've read, that can happen if you've had too many other transactions on your account. Sometimes certain accounts, you can only have so many electronic withdrawals in a month. And it may have been that he had too many of those. And so when it came time for the tax payment, which was at the very end of November, the account was not accepting any more of these electronic withdrawals. That may have been the answer, and it may not have been. I don't think anybody's certain.
Okay. Well, I'm in favor of abating the interest on that one.
The penalty?
I mean, the penalty, sorry, 38. The Eatons. Looks like the treasurer and the recorder seem to favor this one as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, this seems like this is a pretty similar situation to,
And there's no county error. I don't think there's county error.
right, there's no county error.
county
Again, we
error.
have
That's-
we have a name change that happened late in the year. This was in September of 2018, so it's too late to get your tax notice if you buy a property in September
It was a name change.
2018, or a name change or an address change. That's not gonna be in the system. And so when you do that, you really should get those taxes, you should think about getting those taxes taken care of, because you're not gonna get that notice in the mail.
That one's $25.92.
And again, I'd go with the treasurer's recommendation on this one.
And then the last one that I would like to talk about is the Hodge properties.
In this case, I believe, I will say on this one, the taxpayer did not have enough money in the account, in her checking account. And so the checks were returned for not sufficient funds. I believe she mailed the check in timely, but they were rejected because there was no money in the checking account. And so she ended up having to pay late and incurred a penalty, I believe. And it's probably fair to add that, I think she claims that this is the first time she individually had to take care of this duty.
So there's no county error, it was simply a bad bounce check, right?
Bounce check.
I would go with the assessor and treasurers on this one.
Yeah, I mean, this one here, I felt like we should probably hold it the way it is, the way it's recommended. I just wanted to bring it up. It does have some similar touches, but in this case, I feel the same way. as well, okay. Those are all the ones that I had. We're at the end anyway, right?
Yep, that was the last one.
Okay.
It's probably fair to comment that I think I did recommend approving one of these, so I mean.
Good job, Paul.
One out of, what, one, two?
First, was
One
that
out
the
of
one,
five.
was that the one you were in conflict with others on? Just kidding you. Thank you, Paul, for all your diligent work on these. I'll move that we approve property tax actions contained in regular agenda item number 2 with the noted changes.
Second that?
Does that work for you?
I think that works
The
for me.
noted changes are?
Justin probably got all those. You two's got them.
We've got a motion and a second to approve the property tax actions, as recommended with the exceptions of the ones that we talked about, and either agreed to waive the penalty, or in some cases, interest, or to hold what was recommended. Any discussion on it? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That passes 3-0. Okay, number nine is on our regular agenda, is to approve and authorize the commission chair to sign an addendum number 1 to the real estate purchase agreement. The question on this, is Richard still here? It just says that this is. Are you getting a copy?
I might be able to answer your question.
It just talks about being deposited into the building and maintenance fund. And I'm not sure where those money came out. I would just, instead of having it being deposited into the building and maintenance fund, that there is further discussion of where that money actually comes back into.
And the reason it was on there originally, that's where the property was originally purchased from, back in 2007 or 8. So that was, when we went back and looked at where that came from before, that's where it was purchased out of.
Okay.
That was the reason that was identified that way, so.
And that's not in the addendum. That's a subsequent note as to where those deposits ought to be.
Right.
But that's not in the addendum itself.
Yeah, so we can have further discussion
Oh,
of
yeah,
where that comes back
it was
into.
just the,
Okay.
that's where we identified it, because that was where it was paid for from back in 2007 or 8. I don't remember when that was actually purchased.
I think it was the, yes, the height of the market.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
The previous height.
So a motion be in order? Approved, hopefully.
I'll move that we approve item number 9.
Second?
Got a motion and a second to approve agenda item number 9. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That passes 3-0. We table number 10. Number 11 is to approve a resolution to contribute $25,000 in cash, $25,000 in kind. Yeah, Richard, you should have stayed here.
Honestly, the copy I put off for the agenda has different numbers than what you had, and it didn't have the
Oh,
second
yeah. Yeah.
work session. That's why I'm screwed up today, so.
Yeah, the numbers are, yeah.
But anyway, yeah, we received a request from State Parks. I have Jason Allen here from State Parks. He's the former manager of the Utah Lake State Park. I don't know what your title is today.
Planner for the
Planner.
division.
Anyway, we have an area down by the Utah Lake State Park, right at the western end of the Provo River Trail, where State Parks owns some ground. They would like to build a parking lot, trailhead area there. It would be a benefit to us for the trail users. It would include a restroom. It would include a non-motorized boat launch into the Provo River, as well as some other amenities down there. We've had a request to do some in-kind work, and as well as providing some cash of about $25,000. And Jason's here to answer any specific questions you have on the request.
I first read the one, and then I saw the revised. It was 25, then it was 75. how do we get to these numbers, first off? And
Sure. The state parks hired King Engineering. It's estimated if we were to do the trailhead, as Richard said, it's around $350,000. If you want number by number, we've got in-kind matching from the Mitigation Commission of 30, Utah Lake Commission for 15, Division of Fire Forestry for 5. State Parks is coming in with restroom and other in-kind matching. With all of that, and we're applying for the outdoor recreation grant for $150,000 and a recreational trails grant for an additional 50. You add all that with what we're asking the county to contribute, we come out with $350,000 to start and finish the job in one phase.
so we were just in the bucket of
You
potential.
are one of many
Yeah.
pieces of the gears that need to move this project forward.
And so this money, where's it coming from?
I would assume we would want to look at the TRCC money for it, where it would be tied directly to the trails. It's not something that's currently in our 2019 budget. So that would be my assumption of where we would have to look for it, unless there's other places that
So
the
if
commission
that,
has available. So.
if that's the case, then we would have to strike this off the agenda until we went through the TRCC tab board.
And with the change of where Lisa had done that stuff before, is one of your assistants taking that role now of is it
Right.
is it Ezra?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
So happy to get that on the agenda for tab board.
And what's the time frame for the next tab board meeting?
I don't know. Is it next week?
What's your time frame?
The outdoor recreation grant closes the 15th of February.
Okay, so we
should still work.
could we maybe continue that on your meeting?
Oh, yeah, we can continue. I was just trying to.
I'll work with Ezra to get that on the.
Okay.
I'll
So, and
go
then,
your direction.
so we'll need to go through that tab board first, so we don't get ahead of ourselves. Second, on the in-kind, how's that?
That would be manpower and equipment with our roads crews, basically our heavy equipment, doing excavation and grading work.
So
at the
is
site.
that B road funding? B road money?
It would actually be billed back into parks for our time that our guys are down there. It would be the equipment that's in the roads department, but the roads division, but it's billed back through parks.
Just as long as we don't use B road?
Correct.
Because if we use B road,
And
then it's a
we're not in
$50,000
compliance.
thing.
Yep.
Because we're gonna have to lease it out.
Yeah, it would be billed back through parks. That's the way our cost centers are set up.
Okay.
So is the cash can go through the tab board. Are we saying that the in-kind could not come from TRCC funding?
Essentially, it would, because that's where parks is funded out of.
Yeah.
For parks
Well,
and
we've
funding.
already got that.
Yep.
That's
That's
already
already
in.
in.
So we just need to continue for what?
If we could you'd have the tab board meeting, is it next Monday?
Monday?
If you feel good about
We do
having it
next week.
on next Tuesday's agenda,
Tuesday?
you're okay with that, then,
Make it work.
okay.
I move we continue this item for next week's meeting.
Second?
Got a motion and a second to continue item number 11 for 1 week. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
That passes 3-0. Number 12. Richard?
Yes.
It appears like this is a budgeted item, so
Is
we
this-
have it
is
in
this
the,
the
we have
Mountain
it
West
in the
truck?
account. Yeah, the truck, the
Okay.
semi-truck. Sorry, your numbers are,
Yeah.
whatever your number is, it's the truck.
I'm
it's
trying to keep
semi-truck.
up, so.
My question is usually on these bigger equipment like that, I don't know what it's for. Are we replacing a vehicle?
This is a replacement vehicle.
Recap?
Yeah,
What's-
this is a replacement vehicle with recap. This is the transport tractor, the semi-tractor that we use. That's the replacement of that vehicle. We actually have a dump truck that we're purchasing from Mountain West as well. The dump truck was on the state contract list. The transport tractor was not.
Right.
So we have to do a independent agreement outside of the state contract. But the pricing was done consistent with the state contract pricing, so.
Yeah, and I saw that letter from Robert Baxter on there.
That's
so-
why you're seeing it here as a independent contract, so.
So we do have we do have some recap.
Yes, we have
that's
all the
on
money,
there that-
budgeted
Usually on
for
the
it.
bigger equipment stuff, it's not a wash, but we're usually pretty close.
Yes, and I believe that this is 124,689. I think Gina told me we had 124, so we've had to find $700
Oh, okay.
to make it match.
Fair
So
enough. Okay, I didn't know those details. I just wanted to ask that. Okay.
Move that we approve this item?
No, I'd just like to make one little comment. The contract that was uploaded for this one has the old last year's commission chair with Commissioner Ivy and the past clerk auditor and the past county attorney. So the one for signature that will be sent to your office will reflect the current elected officials.
Right.
Thank you.
So,
Perfect. I'll second the motion to approve regular agenda item 12.
Got a motion and a second to approve agenda item number 12. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That passes 3-0. Okay, number 13. Bryce, this one's to adopt or deny an ordinance to amend section 6-3-D-14.
Bryce Armstrong, Community Development Staff. Commissioners, if you recall, this item was continued from 2 weeks ago with the intent of staff looking at a couple issues that were brought up at that meeting. So I've updated your red line copy in your agenda documentation along with the ordinance. Just to be quick, this is an exception for proposed subdivisions to the common area requirement for certain sizes and criteria, number of lots for a subdivision. Probably would be rarely used, but it is something that was asked by the commission to address. The changes specifically for this meeting include the reference or inclusion of BLM land, federal land managed by the BLM. Also, we've delineated in the federal properties that land be available for recreational use. That was at the request or the suggestion of the county attorney's office. There may be some federal lands that could potentially qualify that may have a restriction on use there. So we clarified that. And then the other item is number 4 is we included the involvement of the adjoining, if it's a public park, the adjoining agency. The language that's proposed is acknowledgement versus consent. Kind of started with that. We've found that a lot of times these are next to a city, and the reason they're developing in this county is because there's an adversarial relationship sometimes, and so we hesitate to have the cities have an approval action on a county application, and so we started with at least having them have an acknowledgement, a written acknowledgement that they're aware that this is going in, and that would give them the opportunity to present any concerns if they have any.
Just from a matter of general kind of ordinance policy, I mean, hypothetically, if you were drafting a kind of exceptions, does it make sense for you to kind of do that if the situation which you're accepting is likely only be used once? Or would it be better to just have the property owner, rather than waste or spend the time coming up with these exceptions, if you know that it's only going to occur once in the history of time, would you rather just tell the property owner to try to seek their own exception or approval?
Yeah, generally these, I mean, we have exceptions and they're built into our ordinance, and they generally originate from a situation that's arisen. It doesn't mean that's the only situation that would utilize it, and so we try, I think, especially in this situation, we tried to look at it and to craft a scenario that would accommodate different locations. A lot of times if it's, I guess to answer your question, it probably would be preferable at times to have the applicant drive that. If it's something that the county commission feels strongly that can be utilized kind of countywide, then that's, or for whatever reason, then they can be the one that initiates that. So I don't know if answering your question.
No,
but
that's helpful. I mean, I think I had previously asked, and I think some of my research on this would suggest that it is a very, very narrow potential use cases within, that would fall under all of these requirements.
Yeah, and I think even getting to the threshold that you have that number of lots in the county that are that size, that's rare just because of our land use policies. But, you know, those scenarios do exist.
I didn't have any additional questions, so.
The other item I didn't include, it was, we talked about a cap. I think Commissioner Ainge had mentioned a cap. We didn't include that. We can certainly include that. We did some research to just to kind of look to see which areas could potentially utilize this. And it really boils down to about 25 locations that are adjacent to a public park. We looked at the zoning of the county land around that, and of those 25, only about half would qualify. It would be big enough. The park's too small to really qualify for this. And the most lots that could be potentially accomplished through this would be about 40 in the Spring Lake area. And they have some issues with water capacities because they have to be on a water system. So practical application would show that, you know, the most someone could get currently with our current, how many parks we are and what the zoning is about 40 lots that could utilize this exception. So if you feel like, you know, that number's potentially too high or could go higher, then you could put in a cap there if you'd like.
My general sense is that this is too narrow of a circumstance to draft into this exception. I also have concern the language that was added. You mentioned the adversarial relationships that can exist between a city and the county, and I think that by providing an acknowledgement right, which really does not give them any ability to object, might exasperate the potential adversarial nature rather than help it. So those are some of my concerns with this.
I guess on that item, the hope was that this would facilitate dialogue between the two and not be a situation where one's digging in their heels and saying, well, we're not going to give you this consent to that, what you're asking for in the county because of the situation, so.
And let me address that if I could, Commissioner Ainge. I think one of the concerns that we have is if we tie it to a city, which currently we don't have anything in ordinance that ties it to a city requirement. If we tie it to a city and they meet every other requirement in our county ordinance, but the city refuses to give them an approval, then we have to deny it still because we haven't got that approval, and we have to defend it based upon the city's unwillingness to give them approval for that. And that's makes it very difficult when we're going through the land use portion of it and on appeals and those kind of things, and they meet everything else, but the city, for whatever reason, will not give them that approval, and now we have to defend that in court, potentially.
What if they're proper, I'm thinking of, I don't even know where this would apply, but, or who this was written for or anything, but, what if the city properties had a fence all the way around and you actually did touch part of their park, but it's walled off, by a fence? And because of that fence, you know, you have to go clear around. I don't even know what clear around could be for the residents that, because the whole purpose behind this thing is to say you don't need to have the open space because you have open space that's close, that is close to the property.
Correct.
So, and I can see the beauty of that instead of having a little park here and a park here, and everyone's got to have their own little separate parks. If you already have that property or BLM or Forest Service land, it's right there. Theirs is a little bit easier because I'm sure they don't have a fence necessarily, but they could. So how does that tie in with this, because they're actually walled off from access?
It has to, but in the ordinance wasn't it specifically stated you had to have access, right, through a maintained opening?
Yeah, well, it says a minimum of one access easement to the abutting public park.
Public park.
Yeah, so what does that mean, though? That's the question is, does that mean you have access on a road that eventually goes around the block and gets there? Or does that mean that you actually have access? Because I'm thinking of a city park. If you're on the back side and they have it all fenced off, you're gonna have to get their permission to have some sort of access through there.
Correct, yeah, and I think that would be contemplated in both 2 and 4. We're saying you have to have on the plat on your side, an easement that allows your residents to, you know, go through your development to this access point to the park, and then have an access that's usable. And if that is a county, city, or state park, then you're getting the written acknowledgement that you are utilizing this exception, including that access, for the purpose of the common space.
The city would
reduction.
have to have to click off on that if they want to give you access.
Well, I
if you
think the
did not
developer would
that.
have to show that they have that
Have to-
access, and so they'd have to work with the city.
Right, and it's specifically stated on an abutting side.
Correct.
So how would they show that? Again, your property abuts it, but it's a fence that's going all the way around.
But
How would they show it?
But in number 2, that they're gonna have to demonstrate that. There is an opening there.
Right.
Because the easement, access easement has to be on the abutting side. So if the fence was there,
And the city has to agree to open it up.
or they wouldn't
They
qualify.
wouldn't be able to do it.
Right, or they wouldn't qualify, because they
Yeah.
wouldn't, because
And
they
that's where,
wouldn't
that's
meet
where I was
that.
getting with it. So there is,
standard.
there is some form where the city could say, we're not gonna allow that to happen, even though you have property that's adjoining.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
They
again,
could
it's,
refuse to open the fence, and then they wouldn't qualify under this ordinance and would have to provide the open space in their own development.
yeah, I think that the access term in number 2 that Commissioner Ivy was referring to is, it connotates entry. So,
Yeah, I'll just look at the practicality of it.
No,
how that's gonna
great
work.
question.
Any other,
Mhm.
any other thoughts on it?
Motion to be in order, I'd make one. I'll move that we adopt regular agenda item number 13 under the updated red line version.
Motion?
I mean, I'm opposed to this, but I guess that can go to a vote. Or the-
Yeah, you can second it.
I'll
instead of
second
vote
that,
against
can
it.
we do that?
Yeah, I've got a motion and a second to the adoption of the 13. Any further comments? I'm curious that you're,
Yeah, I mean, for me, this is a very specific, this is incredibly narrow. I think that if you take all of these requirements, the language is going to map most likely to a very specific development. And there has been tension between counties and cities. And I think that where there is development that's on county land that is adjacent to a city, the city should be a part of that discussion. And I don't see the need to pre-wire this exception. If a developer wants to come and they want to come together with the city and we figure out what makes sense for that particular development in that particular city park, then we can have that conversation. But I think that the likelihood of this applying generally in the county is incredibly low. This is, and so I just think it's better to have the property owner come, talk to the city, talk to the county, seek exceptions. Everyone does something that makes sense. And so that's the reason why, I don't support this. I think that it's entirely different. If we're talking about county development that's not immediately adjacent to a city, and we want to talk about what's good land use policy and good zoning, that's great. But this is an island of county, most likely, if it's adjacent to a city park. And that's why I think the city needs to be involved, not just later acknowledging in some sort of weak acknowledgement, but in this process, where they're trying to figure out what's going to affect their city, their residents, their city park.
Fair enough, I agree there is a limited scope, but as I look at areas, particularly around Eagle Mountain, West Mountain, Lakeshore area, we abut a lot of BLM property. There's areas up around Sundance where we could have developments that could potentially touch national forest. I think this is an ordinance that frees up a capacity for a developer to utilize their property space. And with any law, there's certainly a capacity for it to be abused, but in a general policy for the county as a whole, I see it as advantageous in those various areas.
yeah, I love the fact that we have Forest Service and BLM land on there. I see the conflict with the cities, potentially with the city, if they're seeing it differently. I love that we're identifying it on a general county-wide basis with the Forest Service. So I've got another question though, because you bring up a point that I think, is there a process that we can go through right now that would give exceptions without actually writing it in like this? Or let's just say we took off the city park one and we had the Forest Service and the BLM land. Is there a way that somebody could come to us and say, listen, this is what we'd like to do, there's a county park, there's a city park next door? Is there a process for that?
Not in this development process, because that's an administrative function, and so we're holding the ordinance in effect to their application. And so if there is an exception, has to be built into the process. And so that's kind of what this text amendment is creating, is the criteria that you'd have to show that you meet to take advantage of that exception.
So, I'm newer to this, so, so you were saying they would seek an exception, they would basically seek the same ordinance change, but there would be an applicant attached to it. And in that process, they could potentially provide more detail about the proposed development.
To utilize this proposal?
No, you're saying there's not an exception.
Currently, right.
In answer to Commissioner Lee's question.
In the application process.
But if there was an applicant attached to the proposed change, then they could come forward and kind of explain more about their specific development.
Potentially, but it would still be the same process we're doing now. It would be a text amendment that would be applicable everywhere in the county.
Okay.
And I'm sure, I guess an applicant could maybe give the scenario that they're facing, why is what's necessitating the need. But we're kind of looking at this as if it would be applied, if it would be applied everywhere, and what those what criteria would be to be met.
Okay. Well, we got a motion and a second on the number 13. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Nay?
That's a 2-1. And Justin, you have who those, okay. All right, now we'll move to on my list, it's number 15 first, because Peggy's asking for this to be first, which is to adopt or deny an ordinance to amend the Utah County Code, Chapter 11, licensing and business regulations.
Yes, as you recall, 2 weeks ago, we had work session and we had a pretty good discussion about these potential changes. And so just briefly, since it's afternoon, and I guess I should say Peggy Kelsey from Community Development Staff, sorry about that. So briefly, the changes would be to add additional agricultural type operations to the exemptions from business licensing, and then also update some procedures that we have going on within this code. And so that's it, just really quickly, unless you want me to go into more detail or.
Yeah, I mean, I've reviewed it. We've had a work session. I feel
Right.
comfortable with where
I
we're at.
love this one.
Okay.
I think it's deregulating and
Yep,
great.
works. Thank you.
Okay.
Your work and your communication with it and everything.
Okay. And then the next agenda item would be to refer to the Planning Commission for me to do a review of anything that does specifically require a business license
For
that
land
now
use.
would be exempt, to remove those.
Right. Yeah, at first when I saw that, I was wondering what we were
Right.
doing, but then it was
Yeah,
explained to
yeah,
me.
I needed to follow up with the land use ordinance,
Right.
county code land use ordinance. In some instances, work very closely together, so.
Okay. Well, a motion be in order then.
I'll move that we approve regular agenda item number 15 to adopt the ordinance amending the Utah County Code Chapter 11 as stated in the modified red line version.
I second that.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes 3-0. And do we need any discussion on 14? That one's just to take an action to refer it.
I'll move that we approve regular agenda item 14.
I second that.
Got a motion and a second to approve agenda item number 14, which is taking action to refer to the Utah County Planning Commission as proposed in 14. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That passes 3-0. Okay. I have that we need, let's see, that's it, right?
Mhm.
Okay. I have that, we can, unless one of the commissioners, 20 and 21, we can strike those. We need 22 and 23.
Electronic Judah has that.
We can strike 20 and 21.
Okay. I move that we strike item 20 and 21.
Second?
I got a motion and a second to strike agenda items number 20 and 21. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye, that passes 3-0.
I move that we approve and set a time, date, and location for a closed meeting to discuss the character, professional competence, physical or mental health of an individual or individuals at this location following the completion of the regular agenda.
Second?
A motion and a second to approve and set a date, time, and location as stated number 22 on our agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that passes 3-0.
Move that we approve and set a time, date, and location for a closed meeting for a strategy session to discuss pending or reasonably imminent litigation at this location following the completion of this agenda.
Do we need the date on there?
You said time.
Today's date and time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, I must have missed that. Second?
Got a motion and a second to approve and set a date, time, and location for a strategy session as stated number 23 on our agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That passes 3-0. Thank you. We already did the work session, so we'll move into our closed meetings. Oh, wait, I should probably get some public comment. Is there any public comment? Chris? Oh. Okay, thank you.